If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment for more videos like this. For those who explore haunted and abandoned places, ruins, or haunted forests and woods, what are your scariest and creepiest encounters with the unknown? Well, in a town right next to the town I live in, there's an abandoned church almost completely covered in various vegetation. A couple of my friends had already been in the church but hadn't seen the entire thing. They invited me to come along, and I accepted because it sounded mental as duck. So we drove to the church at around 8 p.m. and parked where the car wouldn't be easily noticed by passers-by. We took a path that led to the front of the church and entered. This place was messed up. The entrance led directly into the main room of the church. There were no seats or anything. The podium was still there, though, and even had a dusty old Bible still on it. Graffiti was all over the walls, mostly atheist and anti-government ramblings. We continued to traverse the church and failed to see anything more interesting. Until we found out there was a basement. So we went down into the basement and saw a bunch of random shit. There was a pentagram on the ground, candles everywhere, a Bible that, when I picked it up, smelled of urine, and a chest in the corner of the room. Yep, we're pretty sure this was a hub for some cult to do their rituals. It felt like a goddamn horror movie. But the chest in the corner made me curious. So I took my flashlight, broke the padlock, and opened the chest. I sht you not, there was a rotting animal head in that chest. I'm pretty sure it was a goat, because of the horns, and because, Satan. As soon as we saw that, we left as quickly as possible. What's even more ducked up is that about a week later, there was a homicide in that abandoned church. Police found a 14-year-old girl dead in the basement, in the middle of the pentagram. So yeah. I think I'm done traversing abandoned buildings for a while. Downtown in my city was not a good place to be when I was a kid. It hadn't gentrified yet, lots of drugs, lots of bums, lots of abandoned or partially abandoned buildings. I loved exploring. One day I got into what must have been an old textile shop. There are lots of sewing machines, lots of big tables, some old rolls of rotting fabric, and tons of sharp ships. I was working on breaking into an old desk when I heard something. Bums were always a possibility, and crazy bums were crazy. I looked around, didn't see anything, went back to work on the desk, heard something again, looked up, saw nothing, and went back to work. Then I saw what looked like someone coming towards me very fast. I started yelling, running, climbing over shit, looking back, and one of the dress forms had come loose and rolled towards me. They were everywhere. I had no idea if there was anybody in there with me, but seeing that thing coming at me, I thought I was being bum rushed. I do a lot of hiking and love to explore abandoned areas, ghost towns, and old parts of left behind buildings. This past fall, I was hiking a familiar trail and noticed a smaller path that was near the entrance. I decided to follow it, and I found a series of trails I used to hike as a kid. One of them led down a mountain. As I'm making my way down, I can see a super tiny cabin way off in the forest. I couldn't figure out how to get to it, so I took a few pictures and left. Later on, I invited some friends to go hiking, and we ended up trekking through the bushes and undergrowth to get to the cabin. First off, the cabin was the size of a small room, looked super old, almost like a log cabin, and was in a really odd part of the forest. As soon as we got to it, I noticed human feces in random places all around the cabin, as well as torn shreds or clothes and something cotton-like. It seriously creeped me out, but we wanted to take a peek inside before we left. The inside had 2 small beds with camping-style mattresses that were just torn to shreds. Animals? Humans? I explained the cotton pieces outside, though. There was trash and old, destroyed clothes laying everywhere inside. It smelled really off, and we just generally felt like we shouldn't be there. We all left feeling super creeped out. Why would someone live that far into the forest? And why the heck were their beds and clothes destroyed like that? I've thought about going back a few times, but I'm too worried I'll run into someone or something in the cabin. A friend and I were once doing a bit of urbex in my hometown, a small town in mid-Wales. There are a lot of old buildings in the area, and the mishmash of architecture makes the rooftops in particular an interesting maze to explore. On this particular occasion, which was probably around 2006-07, we decided to climb around the old nunnery. It was a cold, clear night, which made for good visibility but wasn't so chilly that our fingers would get numb while climbing. Perfect. We found our way up a low wall in the alleyway beside the building, which in turn led us onto a low roof at the back. I went first, and while I was checking out the area for cameras, I glanced up at the building. In the top corner window, pressed against the glass, was an old woman with no eyes. Her skin was pale, and her mouth was hanging open. Where her eyes should be were 2 gaping blue-black holes. She wasn't moving. I was so horrified that my brain went into overdrive and took in every detail. I even remember what her teeth looked like. I turned, shaking, and went over to my friend, who had just made the ascent. He was shocked by how pale I was and asked if everything was okay. I told him to walk out there and look up at the window. I was hoping he'd see nothing. I wanted it to be a trick of the light. Puzzled, he walked out and looked up. He froze, and I watched the color drain from his face. After a solid minute of staring, he turned and came back to me. "It's probably a bear or a dog or something," he whispered. He was shaking. It sounds like a ridiculous thing to say, but it was his attempt to rationalize the situation. I was having none of it. "I'm going back out there," I told him. "And if it's still there, we run." He nodded. It took several minutes to psych myself up, but I went out there and forced myself to look. It was still there. No trick of the light. No teddy bear. There was no wrinkle in the curtain. I tried to see it like an optical illusion and force sense into it. It was an old lady with no eyes, a mouth open, and a face against the glass. We ran, and we never went back on that roof again. Basically, I'm a skeptic of convenience. I'm interested in everything paranormal, but I'm just not convinced by it. However, I do really want to be. This leads me and my friend, who is a strong believer, to take me to some woods near his house, which he claims is haunted by the spirit of a man who killed himself in those woods. Now that the story of the guy is true, he did indeed kill himself in the woods, but are the woods haunted? I'm unsure. So me and him have been doing some low-key investigation into it. Now we've seen some creepy shit, heard some creepy shit, and nothing that couldn't be explained away by something rational. So we got a little brave and decided to go onto this field connecting to the forest at night. It was around 11, and me and my friend were simply walking across the field. When I noticed there was a dark humanoid silhouette slowly walking towards the forest, I turned to get my friend's attention, then turned back to notice that he wasn't walking anymore. He was full on sprinting towards the forest, away from us, and we simply watched them disappear into the forest. There is nothing on the other side of those woods for a good few miles, so someone running through the woods in the middle of the night isn't exactly feasible. It's by far the most paranormal thing we've encountered near that forest, and we've never encountered anything similar to that again. That's my story. I hope you believe me because only me and my friend know what we saw, and everyone else just brushes us off. I was a freshman at Ohio University, and I visited the old tuberculosis ward at the abandoned Ridges Asylum. I was with a friend, and we were walking around the ward while looking for a way into the old brick building. While we paused to look down the hill towards the city of Athens, we heard a noise from the woods. I assumed it was another college student attempting to scare us, so I shouted into the woods to our left in hopes of coaxing our assailant out. Instead, a small, roughly 3 feet tall, shadow emerged from the tree line. It bent sticks and saplings out of the way as it moved, but it was featureless, though opaque. It moved about 10 feet out of the trees while my friend and I watched, motionless. We stood, knowing that it was watching us but seeing no features in the small, opaque shadow. I attempted to shine my flashlight upon it, but while it blocked the beam, the light revealed nothing. Eventually, the shadow moved back into the forest and disappeared. I visited the building twice more, and both times I felt certain that I was being watched by the shadow, though I never saw it again. I had to share this story because I am still haunted by nightmares about the feeling that the shadow gave me, and I fear that I always will be. As a local of the area and growing up in the town right outside of the Bridgewater Triangle, I find myself lucky and disappointed at the same time that I didn't have things happen in my own backyard. Over the past few years, friends and I have always been searching for something out there, and after a good 3 years of long walks in dark, scary places, we've finally had some success. The first one happened a week ago. My girlfriend Katie and my best friend Josh, who shares my love of stories about what has been reported to be out there, were exploring this abandoned bridge in the heart of Bridgewater. Over the past few years, we have hung out there year-round, shooting the SHT and listening to the sounds of nature. So on Monday night, we decided to go check it out and just go for a night walk. No big deal, we have done it 100 times. We park our car and get past the roadblock. We get about 20 feet ahead when my friend Josh looks into the giant field next to us and points to this black mass that's sitting about 6 feet tall and looking like this but sitting vertical and about 100 feet down a path. He stops dead in his tracks, and we look at it. I pointed my light at it, which didn't help because iPhones don't have the brightest flashlights. We're squinting, trying to figure out what it is, so I say, only one way to find out. And I start walking towards it. Josh and Katie were ahead of me, so they started walking towards it and made it a quarter of the way when they stopped dead in their tracks. They shine their lights on it and realize this black mass is actually dark gray or black. They run past me, yelling, "What the duck?" And I follow in pursuit. We get back to the roadblock, and Josh says to us, "Did you see that?" I say no, and Katie is shivering, saying that it swiveled towards them and moved a bit. I wanted to go back and look at it again, but I am not risking anything to check it out. We tell each other it was probably farm equipment, and our eyes are playing tricks on us. When we get home, we message our group chat and agree to go back in the daytime to assure ourselves that there is nothing out there. Katie decided to drive back herself the next day to take some pictures, and when she got there, her stomach dropped. There was nothing in that field that could have been what we saw. So she snapped some pictures and left. So this past night, we decided to bring our friend Mike with us. Mike is also one of our best friends inside this group, and I feel like he doubted all of the stuff we were telling him. We all get to the bridge and start walking towards where we saw the black/gray thing from the first night, just to make sure it wasn't a trick the night was playing on us. We get another 50 meters down the old road, and here is something moving in the woods. Whatever it was moving quickly and precisely. We hear it in the wooded part of the road, but it loudly and quickly makes its way parallel to us. There's a house on the property, and the German shepherds that live there are going nuts, and that's when Josh said to us, "We need to get the duck out of here." We leave and go to a Walmart to duck around for a bit, then decide to go back for closure. We get as far as we did the last time when we hear something big knocking branches off trees in the woods. We shut off our lights and listen, the branch breaking stops, and we stand there. We start hearing noises in the trees behind us and then a loud crash in the woods. We then all agreed to walk back to the car without sharing a word with each other. I'm not sure if we'll ever figure out what's out there. Josh doesn't ever want to go back, and he's always been the guy to not be afraid to explore places. For now, we don't want to know what's out there, but I know deep down that I want an answer. So when my friend and I were younger, we used to love the idea behind cryptids, still do, so we'd make trips into nearby woods to try and see something. Well, one day, on our way back from the woods near my house, we had the feeling of being followed, so we turned around, and what we saw frightened us. A humanoid creature, all white and without a visible face, crouched down, slowly following us. Although as soon as we saw it, whatever it was, it took off into a nearby cornfield, and to this day, we still vividly remember it but have no idea what it was. So I'm sharing here in the hopes that someone here knows. Where I'm currently living, Birmingham, UK, I have now been off work for 2 months, so every day is just walking and exploring the area around me. On Friday, I met up with my brother, and we went for a walk. Walking over the bridge across the motorway, M42, we look down and see a small slip road barely visible and, sure as hell, not on any GPS map. Cool. We head down to have a look down there. It's a public road, there are no entry signs. Around 2 minutes in, my brother says, "I keep seeing those things up there, what are they?" I look up, and he's pointing straight up at a camera obscured by man-made foliage. We walk back a little, and sure as shit, there are loads of cameras monitoring every section of the area. Another 2 or 3 minutes down the road, and a cyclist comes from ahead towards us, an older woman around 45 to 50 with graying blonde hair and a blue summer dress on. She stares at us as she cycles past. We watch behind us as she goes past, and about 100 meters away, she stops, turns the bike around, and stares at us. We think she's probably a kook, so walk on. Another couple of minutes go by, and a man walks past, carrying a dog lead in one hand and a stick in the other. No dog though, not one that went past, not one behind him, and we never saw that dog ever, and not one in the open plan woodland around us. As soon as he walked past us, he said, "I'm still here." At this point, me and my brother are thinking, what in the actual duck is going on? Turn a slight bend, and at the end is a giant driveway to what looked to be a great estate that was demolished 150 years ago. Weeds overgrown, the roof collapsed, walls now rubble on the ground, and what looked to be an exquisite entrance was still standing, the tiles on the wall plus the plumbing pipes of an old bathroom with no fixtures. And everything was covered in black and white floor tiles. And that was it. Behind it was a giant body of water, cutting it off from the rest of the area. We couldn't go anywhere but back where we came. We have no idea where the cyclist and dog walker came from or why they would be down there on a road you need to go down the motorway to access. I used to spend a lot of time with my elder cousin and my friends exploring the countryside surrounding our town, drinking beers, and just being young men up for adventures and killing time together. On this one occasion, around 2009 to 2010, my friend Woody had a girlfriend over from Sweden who brought along a female friend of hers. We all went to the pub on the edge of town, drank many beers, and, as it was summer, left while it was still light outside. We decided to head back to my cousin's house, pick up some more beers, smoke, and acoustic guitars, and head out to the fields to continue hanging out and making the most of the warm summer night. There were 6 of us present: Woody, Billy, my elder cousin Aidan, the 2 ladies Celine and her friend, I can't recall her name, and me. We headed under the rail bridge, climbed the gate to the field, and settled about halfway across with a clear view on all sides of us of the surrounding area. Not far off was a small power relay station, and beyond that, the field continued towards woodlands. We started up a campfire, and the beers were flowing. It was a lovely summer night where the sky was a deep, dark blue and the stars and moon shone down on us, illuminating the ground. We amused ourselves by making songs with ridiculous lyrics and doing the usual thing of trading amusing swear words and sayings with our Swedish friends. After a while, everyone was spread out in a circle around the fire, and we were talking at a low volume. Out of nowhere, a man walked right past our group, to which my cousin said, "Holy duck, shit, that dude made me jump," as he choked on his beer, and we all laughed as he had made all of us jump with his reaction. We were laughing at the situation for no more than 10 seconds when Woody cut in with, "Whoa, where the duck did he go?" as he looked around in the direction the man had walked. The man was nowhere to be seen. May I add that there really was no way this guy could have left the field so quickly without us hearing him climb the gate, at the very least, or seeing him. It was too much of a distance from where we were sitting around the fire to leave that field in that amount of time. We all stood up and were scanning the area around us, all in total disbelief that the man could have vanished. I asked the others if they saw what he was wearing, as all I could remember was that he seemed to be wearing a dark gray hoodie with the hood up, and I didn't see his face. Everyone confirmed the dark gray hoodie, but not one of us saw the man's face, even though he almost walked right over where my cousin was sprawled out, at most a meter or so from him. We also confirmed that none of us heard or saw the man coming toward our group even though we were in the middle of a field with clear visibility for miles, and we would have definitely heard someone walking toward us across the grass at the pace the man was traveling. We decided to put the fire out and leave, as this spooked all of us because it just made no sense at all. I never saw Celine or her friend again, unfortunately, so I couldn't ask them if they remembered this, but I know my cousin and I would often talk about this, and both Billy and Woody remember it to this day. I have never seen anything like it. There was 1 second, and he was gone. What I am about to tell is an experience that my friends and I had some weeks ago, during the explosion of the TikTok trend called Randonautica, and it is quite related to it. When we first heard of this trend, we saw it as a way to try something new, to explore the boring and strange neighborhood in which I live, with the hope of seeing something unforgettable and creepy happen. What we saw, I'm sure, could definitely be described that way. It was dark. It was around 11 p.m. We were spent after trying to find something cool with the Randonauts app. We had tried to manifest something scary, an abandoned building or an entity, but the randomly generated points would always lead us to the countryside, and even trying to reach them was impossible as they were private properties. After some hours, we decided to surrender and just walk around my house, as we had never really explored those old streets, and we found a weird and chained gate that blocked the way to a huge, seemingly abandoned, house. There was a couch in front of the front door, on which a black cat was comfortably sitting, and there was a dim light that came from a window that made it look as if there was someone inside. Near the couch, there were some objects from the 1950s, like a basketball basket covered in rust. The atmosphere was spooky, and there were bats flying around, but we decided to keep walking until we found something that looked like a dead-end street. A street lamp started working at once, making 3 gates visible. The first gate was right at the end of the small road, the second one was on the left, and the third one, the most important one, was on the right. I saw another black cat behind the first gate, but I turned around, and after a little bit, I looked back at the gate. As soon as I did that, I literally jumped after seeing a black sheet on the ground that was basically being dragged, but it quickly disappeared. I asked my friends to leave, as we had previously seen a weird shadow, who could have been someone, behind some bushes, and it was giving me anxiety, but we decided to stay and check behind the third gate. There was something strange. It was sitting against a wall, as if it were at rest, and it seemed like it was holding a huge stick even though no hands were visible. Now that I think about it, it may have looked like the Grim Reaper's sickle. A little far from it, there was an old chair, and a drawing resembling a face appeared right on the wall. It was smiling, and it had eyes, a nose, and a curved, drawn line that represented a smiling mouth. There was some sort of noose close to it, on the same wall, and a house that was behind it had a 5-pointed star on the balcony. After seeing this, I really felt as if we were in the wrong place. I started panicking and convinced everyone to leave, and we got back home safe but still with many questions regarding what we saw. These questions we had led us to go back to the creepy street some days later. We thought about going there in the daylight, but somehow we ended up there even later than 11 p.m., and we met different scenery. A huge, white van was resting in the exact same place where we had seen the hooded man, and the drawing on the wall wasn't there anymore. We still can't explain what we saw, and probably we never will, but it's a mystery that will probably haunt us forever. Yesterday, I was running with two of my friends in cross country. We randomly decided to just run off the suburban neighborhood roads and explore this tiny section of woods. It's almost an exaggeration to call it the woods. It's a very small plot of land with a lot of trees in front of it, and the street has suburban houses. Next to it is a church. And to the other side of a river that also goes behind it. Anyway, we decided to walk to the back of the woods area to the river. We just walked alongside the river, which was about 5 feet of grass with long weeds and sticks growing. We found this weird tree that was just cut in half, about 7 to 8 feet off the ground. Just 8 feet of stump. Anyway, today we returned with plans to make our spot on the tree. Keep in mind that absolutely no one goes in this area, and we didn't tell a single person we went there. However, when we got to the base of the tree, there was just a deer skull. Cut it in half. It was 100% not there, and it was just at the base of this tree. It freaked us out, and we left after a little. However, we found another deer skull on our way back, just a little off the path we took. Is there any symbolism in this, if it was just freaky and such a strange occurrence? I'm not making this up, I'm just really curious and wondering if there's any symbolism here. Also, I'm not 100% sure they were deer skulls, but I know they were real skulls of some animal. I've never really had any experiences in my life besides this, and I have a skeptical mind, but I'm very open to the idea of the paranormal. I want to believe. However, I have no explanation regarding this incident. It happened to me and a couple of friends in 2011, and I've never really told anyone other than my significant other. We were 19 and in a ghost hunting phase, had been to some reportedly haunted sites, and didn't have any experiences to speak of. We had heard of a small abandoned village or hamlet a short way out of the city that we were told was very creepy and unsettling. Side note, my grandma, it turns out, was actually born there of all places. It was a very small town with maybe 50 to 100 people that was abandoned, reportedly overnight in the 50s. We decided to go there after dark one evening. All that remains is the collapsed general store, one house, and a perfectly preserved Ukrainian Orthodox church. The small house had the windows and doors removed. We explored inside. There was still wallpaper in the bedrooms and living room, and some old kitchen items were in the kitchen. It was creepy, but mainly because it was dark in the middle of nowhere. We took some videos of the inside and left shortly after. When we got home, we watched the videos and didn't see anything, but we picked up something that sounded like a girl saying, "Please, no." It wasn't clear, so I didn't really think it was anything. Something compelled us to go back a few weeks later, and this is where shit got real. I decided to print off some questions in Latin because I saw a video saying that an inhuman spirit would respond to Latin. It was mostly to creep out another friend that tagged along this time. I was a jackass. The second we drove up to the house, the feeling was different this time. I felt dread. The three of us, our one friend refused to get out of the car, decided to go back in the house and discovered it had a dirt cellar this time, so we went down. It was your average dirt basement. There was absolutely nothing in there except a few old, broken jars. We went back upstairs, and one friend went back to the car. I stood out on the porch, leaning into the window, while my other friend stood on the grass, maybe 10 feet behind me. This is when I decided to start asking the questions in Latin while recording. I asked things like, "Is there anything here? Who or what are you?" And lastly, "Show yourself." At this point, there was a sound from inside the house. I said it again, and before I could even finish, boom, boom. It sounded like something coming up from the basement, and fast. I screamed loudly, as did the friend who was behind me. We ran to my car, and my one friend was already in the driver's seat. We barely got into the car before she was peeling down the dirt road. I cried a little bit, and I don't think there was a word spoken by anyone. There was no way there was an animal or person inside the house. It was tiny, and there was nowhere for an animal or person to hide. Plus, we had just been through the entire house ourselves. There was nothing on the video other than me screaming and telling my friend to go when I got in the car. I have no clue what happened that night, but it scared me to my core, although it made me more curious. I've been to other allegedly haunted places since, but I have never had another experience or encounter. I haven't been back there since and don't intend to return. I was 15 and I'm deaf, but I can speak and sign. Growing up, there was a house next to my aunt, an old abandoned house with 2 floors and a basement. The toured wire fence in the ground was something me and my cousin loved to explore because my aunt had large land reaching the end of the woods. So one day, me and my cousin decided to check out the old house because there was no back door since it was ripped off. As we entered the living room, filled with old furniture and such, it was clear that someone had just walked out without taking anything with them. My 12-year-old cousin suddenly felt afraid because it was dark, but I was determined to explore some more. So we made our way up the stairs, checking if each step was safe by using a large, heavy rock, so when we reached the top, the hall was empty, and there were 3 rooms and 1 bathroom. So I decided to check out the room closest to my cousin's hand. The first room was clean, almost as if no one had ever touched it. The window had no dust on it, it felt like I was looking at a new house. Then we moved on to the second room, which was dirty, and the walls were rotting. There is a bed in the middle of the room covered in leaves, with dark brown stains and the bed frame falling apart. As we were standing in the doorway of the third room, I felt uneasy, almost as if someone were watching us, and I had an urge to throw up. My cousin complained of a rotting smell that wasn't there before, and my instinct told me to turn around. I did. There was a black, transparent figure in a wheelchair in the first room that was clean. Just staring at me, my cousin froze in spot as I signed to him that someone was at the end of the hall watching us. Then, a voice popped up in my head, "Under the cross." I was horrified, grabbed my cousin, and ran out. As we crossed the wire fence, we found a fresh-looking cross in the ground in front of the back entrance. So my cousin, who is very germphobic, makes us wear gloves when we explore. I was thankful that he made us wear it, so I had the confidence to pick up the cross gently, but I was confused by what the voice meant. I put the cross back, and we arrived at my aunt's porch, where my family gathered around. We explained this to my uncle, and he decided to check it out because he knew the land like the back of his hand. He grabbed the shovel and dug where the cross was. He found a cardboard box, opening it up, and there was a deceased cat wrapped in a beautiful pink blanket that I recognized as part of the bed set upstairs in the old house. The box had a note, plastic flowers, and a spell jar surrounding the cat. My uncle, a kind big man, decided to grab a wooden box from the shed and clean it out before putting the cat and the rest of the items in the box, making sure the cat would be comfortable in the afterlife. He read the note, finding out the cat had a name: Snow, a 16-year-old cat with white fur. My uncle buried the cat and used a special tool to carve the name of the cat on the cross. After my uncle questioned his neighbor about the cat, he found out that the cat has been hanging around that house ever since it was abandoned, as we know. The house is heavily monitored 24/7 by my uncle and patrol cars. So after checking the cameras, no one buried that cat, the cross just shows up out of the air. To this day, I'm 19, and my family would often see a ghosty white cat hanging around the property. The house was torn down years later, and my cousins still see black figures and wheelchairs in the middle of the woods. This is something that happened to myself and my best friend Sam in our freshman year of university. It was witnessed by one of our roommates. We were hanging out with a small group of fellow students and a couple of our RAs for the dorms. It was an early fall evening, and the sun was just starting to dip below the plateaus. We were all just hanging out in the living room chatting, and somehow the conversation turned to urban legends. Apparently our university town was rife with them, and one of the RAs told us of a popular legend about a lady who haunted one of the nearby canyons. Her husband and son had gone to work in the mines and died in an explosion, not uncommon, and she went into a deep denial, refusing to leave the house as she insisted they would come home. She died up there all alone, and it's said that she still haunts the canyon, waiting for her husband and son to return from the mines. The area she haunts is marked by the foundation of her former home. After hearing this story and that this was allegedly nearby, we decided to jump in someone's truck and go looking for said foundations to see what we could see. There were probably about 10 of us in total, a couple of people sat up front, and several of us were in the capped bed of the truck. We started driving through the wooded canyon, looking for these foundations, as the sun continued to grow weaker and weaker. Eventually, we were driving in complete darkness. After about 20 minutes or so of winding up canyon roads, the driver pulled into a clearing because he was certain this was the place he'd been to before. It was eerily quiet in the clearing. There were massive shelves of rock around 3 sides of it, with the 4th side containing the road and woods we'd just come out of. Large, flat rocks were all over the place, bubbles that had fallen off the cliff faces ages ago. My friend and I poked around looking for the reputed foundations for about 5 minutes, then went back to the truck and waited while everyone else explored further out in the clearing, lit by the truck's headlights. After a while, it was declared that we must be in the wrong place, as there were no foundations in sight, and we all clambered back into the truck. Most people were disappointed. Sam and I were relieved to get the hell out of that clearing because the whole time we were there, it was so quiet, and it just had the weirdest vibe. The drive back was relatively somber. Sam and I were in the back of the truck, sitting on the wheel wells and looking out the window in the back of the cab, and we both screamed at the same exact time and instinctively flattened ourselves out on the floor. Everyone started shouting, wanting to know what it was. Why did we scream and hide down like that? We told them what we'd seen. There was a white figure running after the truck. It was dense but not solid, it had a head shape, and we both saw little ball shapes pumping up and down like fists. It had followed us around a steep bend in the road and then disappeared. It was maybe half a foot away from the cab's window. Most people laughed at us. Some people told us it must have been tail lights reflecting, it wasn't red, and there was nothing for them to reflect off of. Others said we'd said it just to scare them because finding the foundations was a bust. One of our roommates was quiet for the rest of the ride home and didn't partake in the ridiculing we got from the other members of our group. We got back to the dorm, and Sam and I were sitting in our room, rehashing the whole night, the weird clearing, what we had seen, how the explanations offered up didn't match what we'd witnessed, when our roommate asked if she could come in and talk with us. Amanda came in, sat down, and quietly said, "I saw it. It was just how you described it, and I thought it was getting closer." We asked her why she hadn't said anything in the truck with the others. She said it was because their religion taught that things like ghosts and spirits can't exist on this earth, but she didn't know how to reconcile what she saw with what she believed, and so she didn't want to say that she'd seen it. It really disturbed and upset her that she'd seen this thing, and the following day she asked her father, a bishop, to come over and bless her in our dorm. Later on in the week, we found out that we'd missed the turn for the foundations of the Canyon Lady's house. It was right by the bend in the road where we saw that figure chase the truck. And the weird clearing? That's a place the locals refer to as the Devil's Playground, where apparently satanic worship takes place. One of my first urbexes was Sample Sanitarium. Information is pretty hard to find on it. What I do know is that it was started by one Dr. Thomas Sample, was eventually sold off and renamed Sequoia Hospital, and became known as the Riviera Building after it was no longer a hospital. Weird stories surrounded the place already. The place is supposedly haunted and supposedly causes hauntings in the nearby historic homes, and it was all still boarded up. We got in through a loose board and had flashlights with us to see, done at night so we wouldn't get the cops called on us. There wasn't really much to see, lots of debris and dust everywhere, mouses and spiders. What was odd to our group at first was the fact that the place should echo more. There was lots of open space, but everything sounded sort of muffled. The next floor up was the one that was messed up. Within 5 minutes of walking around, we all had this bad feeling that we were being watched. We headed over to the doorway that led to what used to be a screened-in sleeping porch when we suddenly heard this screeching noise, like someone dragging metal down glass. We start looking around frantically, calling out to see if anyone else was in there, and trying to figure out where the noise came from, considering that there was no glass in any of the windows anymore. Suddenly, we hear this wet, meaty thwack from behind us, back towards the sleeping porch. It was a totally decimated, squashed dead cat, and it was fresh enough dead that the corpse left a splatter of blood, and blood was beginning to pool beneath it. We got the duck out. 2 months later, they began renovations and then stopped suddenly. The place has been sitting in renovation limbo for about 3 years now. I'm not like the Magellan of urban exploration, but I do like to do it occasionally. Anyway, there is this old fort that was used in World War II, near a friend's house. We decided to go explore, as none of us had ever been. This place was part of a state park, but there were never really many people there, at least not when I went there. Anyway, we start wandering through the tunnels and rooms, and it is really dark. It is 2 guys, including myself, and 3 girls. The girls are not having a fun time, as some of the tunnels we were squeezing ourselves through were pretty creepy. We exit a tunnel and find ourselves outside this one room when this smell hits us. He walks in and sees that it is completely painted black with some weird quotes written in white on the walls. Burned up candles littered the sides of it, and in the center there was a pentagram. Now, we had heard of some room deep in the ruins where Satanists went and performed sacrifices, but I kind of always assumed it was that place that my friend's brother's cousin went to by himself. We quickly left, as the girls were really freaking out, and made our way back to the car. I wouldn't say it was that scary, it was definitely off-putting. I plan on doing some more UE this summer, so hopefully I will have a better story in the future. I don't know if it's really creepy, per se, and I'm not exactly a pro-urban explorer, but I do have a tendency to wander off and poke around places where I really probably shouldn't be. I'm a curious person, I guess. Well, a few months ago, I was back from college for spring break. There's a little park in my neighborhood, within walking distance from my house, and behind the park is a bunch of woods that give way to people's backyards, a creek, and some more woods. Cutting through the woods is an old train track, plus a trestle over the creek bed and lower areas. It was repurposed as a running trail and promptly abandoned because my hometown is poor. But it's still a good place to run because it's hidden away and you're generally by yourself. I've often gone up there to run or just to explore, sometimes with friends and sometimes alone. But when I got back from spring break, I wandered farther than usual because I was listening to a podcast and got really into it. It was Imaginary Worlds, by the way. I had diverted off on a few different paths, like footpaths that head out from the main trail, and noticed a smaller one that I'd never seen before. So because I'm dangerously impulsive, I head down it. And encounter a camp, makeshift shelters, road signs propped up against tree stumps, a swollen, waterlogged roll of toilet paper resting atop a rusty metal spike. There were multiple shelters, varying in sturdiness and materials, but the biggest was made out of wood, cardboard, and blue plastic sheeting and formed a kind of pointed arch with an overhang over a bunch of blankets, with cardboard walls extending away from it. No one was home, as far as I could tell, and I was itching to explore further, if not for the fact that I'm a teenaged girl in shorts and a t-shirt with spotty network service and not so much as a house key in the way of defense. Also, something just seemed intensely unethical about messing around with their stuff, like I had accidentally stumbled into a stranger's diary or medicine cabinet and was intruding. So I got out of there, still unsettled by what I had seen. I haven't been back because I'm scared that whoever lives there will have a home, and though most homeless people are certainly not serial killers, I still can't shake the feeling that I'd stepped too far into someone else's home. Just because they're homeless doesn't mean I have the right to root around their belongings. Other notable things I've discovered in those woods over the years are a lone, abandoned hammock. Like, in the middle of the woods, sort of nearish to some of the backyards but not within sight of them. Just hanging. A burst pipe, I found when I was quite young, with my friend. I'm not sure what it was exactly, but it seemed to be a black pipe that went over part of the creek and burst, sending a big geyser of water into the air. We could walk right up to it and put our hands in the spray. I guess you couldn't really call me a professional or even an avid urban enthusiast, but I have an adventurous mind and love exploring abandoned places. With that in mind, I've moved around the US a lot and have explored things from an abandoned yurt in the middle of the wilderness in Colorado to abandoned ranch properties in Texas. But by far, my favorite comes from the town I live in now. A small college town in Texas. There's this place that is fenced off because it's on a federal reserve, and flood waters have also damaged the trails. It's like an old theme park. It has these little buildings that were used for family activities because it was near a lake. Me and my buddy went at night, so we didn't get in trouble for trespassing. It was amazing. We found some amazing buildings that ranged from greenhouses built in the 70s to a water mill that was built in the 40s or so, and even an old chapel that was built in the 1750s. It was so interesting. However, it was like 4:30 a.m., and I just kept getting this bad vibe. It felt like someone was watching us. Or following us off the trail, like in the woods, under the cover of darkness. I could have sworn that I even heard some branches snap. Me and my buddy kept our composure, but I could tell he was on edge too. We were taking GoPro footage, so we decided to come back a little later, when there was light. We hopped over the fence, and pretty much everyone walked down the street to his truck. I'm positive I could hear something following us through the woods. I could feel eyes on us. So we went and explored an apartment complex being built, and then came back to the reserve once it was light out. The feeling of unease had dissipated a bit, but it was still there. I chalked it up to my primal instincts detecting an animal I couldn't see or something like that. We were going to try and get inside the buildings, but most were boarded up. There was one building, however, that we could get into through the rotted hole on the roof. We looked down into it to see a makeshift camp. We could see that it was not occupied at the moment but very recently abandoned, as in, someone was just in there. So we went to the other side of the reserve to explore a little more. We finally decided to make our exit. When we came back past where the man-made camp was, my sense of unease was gone. Whoever was watching us had left. It was a pretty nerve-wracking experience for me. Especially considering what could have happened to both of us in the dark out there. There was an abandoned sanitarium near a bar I was on a first date at. It was a weeknight, and I think we left the bar when it closed. Before 2 a.m., I think maybe midnight because it was dead. Just to give an idea of the time. Henryton Center in Maryland, for anyone wondering. It's all been bulldozed now. So, we park off the side of this road that the sanitarium is off of. You don't just park and, boom, you're there. It's more like you park, go around a no-cars gate, and walk up an overgrown road that leads to a big parking area in the middle of a complex of buildings and in front of the main big hospital. The year was 2008, so we didn't have sweet, bright cell phone LEDs. It was just like, put your phone in text mode so the screen was white, and you used that. We are just about to come into full view of the hospital at the end of the overgrown road when we start hearing this loud banging or knocking sound within about 200 yards of us, I'd say, and from the general direction of the hospital. It's hard to say if the sound was inside or outside of the hospital. I just know it was loud enough for us to hear it very clearly at our distance. At first, I just thought it was wind banging window shutters, but it just persisted and was consistent. Bam! 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 That's what it sounded like. I imagined someone was hitting something like a door frame or maybe the floor inside the building. It sounded like wood on wood. Not clangy like metal. So, once we realized that sound wasn't just wind but was being made by somebody, we immediately knew it had to be some kind of go-away signal for us. If someone was in that hospital, around it, in the tree line around it, they'd have seen the phone lights. We turned around, ran back to my car, and got the heck away from there. BTW, my car was the only one parked in the area. Everyone that visited the place parked at that place. There's basically no other way to that place without crossing the river that runs behind it on foot. It was a Monday night, I think, in August 2008. My girlfriend and I went camping this summer on Meares Island. We didn't know too much about the island aside from the fact that it has some of the best old-growth forest in British Columbia and that there's a campground/hostel and a small village. When we got there, we went exploring and felt fine checking out the abandoned cars and rotting docks, as well as going inland along the waterways. We decided to go check out the lake around dusk since we were told there's a boardwalk and boat available for use. As we walked there in high spirits, we listened to the birds. It was a quick walk, only 15 to 20 minutes from the campsite. Once we hit the lake, the atmosphere changed, however. All animal noises ceased. It was complete silence, the static and other sound is my phone dealing with silence. It was a very eerie feeling. At the time, no one had vocalized this. My girlfriend and I later discussed the experience, and both agreed we felt uneasy and endangered. We were with a third, and I didn't ask how he felt. I didn't feel comfortable going out in the boat, so I stayed on the dock. My girlfriend and our third went out for a few minutes, but felt too creeped out and paddled back quickly. The night had fallen, and we decided it was time to head back to camp since, as I know, silence generally equals predator. We quickly walked back, and once we passed the threshold where we stopped hearing animals, birds could be heard in the distance. It was a quiet walk back, as we were intent on listening for anything behind us. I know that's not a very scary or eventful story. I figured it was probably a black bear or a cougar at worst. But I've encountered a black bear before alone and never felt threatened by one. Cougar could definitely be the reason, though they said the big cats stay further away than that. I am only sharing because I learned today that the island is a Bigfoot sighting hotspot and has a good deal of First Nations lore about wildman and Sasquatch, and that thought creeped me out. Anyone have any similar experiences of not encountering anything but feeling like you're on the verge? Me and a friend found 2 houses on Google Maps in the middle of the woods with clear signs of decay, so we thought to check them out. No roads lead to it, so we had to park at the nearest road and travel around 15 minutes through dense forest to get there. When we got there, we saw a bunch of old cars and a giant old satellite dish in front of a house. The house itself had a padlock, the windows were intact, and there was absolutely no graffiti anywhere. It looked like it was for storage. One of the cars had a map from 1970, and opening the door made a really loud creak. There was a car-sized dirt road between the 2 houses. They were like 100 feet apart, along with a bunch of dense forest. Just as we started down the path, all of a sudden we saw a yellow light in the top window of the second house. I'm not sure if the light was always on or if it just turned on, but that's when we saw it. We were really creeped out and decided to book it out of fear of getting in real danger. So my question is, what the duck was that? I don't believe that someone lives here. I literally went on Google Earth and checked the roads surrounding the forest to see if any led there, and there aren't any. There aren't even any hiking trails that lead there. If someone lives there, they would have to walk through so much forest, and the place is heavily overgrown. So does anyone have any insight, have experienced something similar, or can explain what this was? Is it just a hermit or what? There has to be a person, right? I kind of want to go back, but I'm worried. I'm 25 now, and this happened when I was around 15 or 16, so this was around 2010 or 2011. A friend, let's call her Tiffany, and I decided this night that we were going to try shrooms together. It was my first time, and apparently it was something she had done regularly. Everything was going fine. We mixed it with yogurt and waited till it started to kick in to go outside and explore. She kept explaining to me to not think negatively or I would end up having a bad trip, so I was thinking only positive thoughts. So far, so good. We were walking down the street at maybe 12 p.m. since that was the only time we could get out of her house without her mom waking up. It was super cold outside, and we were both trying like hell to find something to do that night so our high wouldn't be wasted when it happened. Out of nowhere, it looked as if something opened up in the middle of the street, and a ducking dog came running out after us. We took off running. I guess it didn't come to our attention that we were running from something that literally appeared out of nowhere. So we ran, maybe a block, then stopped and thought we were safe. The dog then reappeared and was pacing around the empty parking lot. Just like that, the same thing that opened up to let him out opened back up to let him back in. It took me some time to realize that Tiffany might have just been a really nice person, because there's no way our trip was so in tune that she saw what I saw. Nevertheless, she ran with me from whatever I thought was charging at it and even agreed that she had seen the same thing. It was beginning to get late at this point, and she couldn't find anyone to come pick us up so late. Plus, we were coming down and just needed a chill environment to ride out the rest of the high. We end up getting picked up by someone and crashing at his place before getting dropped off later that day. I guess the moral of this story is that hellhounds are real and terrible to encounter. Luckily, there was surprisingly no one on the road that night, so no one saw us running away from what we thought we saw. Shrooms are a hellish drug and should definitely only be used around someone who has at least a shred of respect for your well-being. So, for some preface, there is a park just outside of Richmond called Bell's Isle. People go kayaking, fishing, and hiking. There is an area of Bell simply called the Rocks, where a lot more illegal things happen. A lot of smoking, drinking, skinny dipping, ducking, all that fun shit. I was, of course, always there. There's just something about the Rocks, just the simple, pristine beauty of it. About a mile down from the entrance to the Rocks, there is a tiny little cove where a massive and decrepit pump house from the early 1960s sits, abandoned. I've seen a duckton of people jump off the third story into the water below, almost like a diving board. Now, when I said that this facility was big, I meant it was big. It stretched out about 50 feet and stood maybe 150 feet tall. There were maybe 5 floors total. There wasn't anything entirely fascinating about the place, to be honest. It was just a massive concrete husk with old piping and scaffolding. The park closes at dusk, just like most parks in the area. But that didn't stop anybody from getting out there, starting a fire on the rocky outcroppings, and getting wasted far into the late hours of the night. I, of course, did so as well. It was maybe midnight before I had decided that, with a 12-pack of Pabst Blue Ribbon, shit's disgusting, 3 or 4 joints, and some s'mores, it was time for me to roll out. Packing up my small backpack, I went ahead and started out towards my truck. After rock hopping for about a quarter mile upstream, I passed by the old pump house. I recalled that there was a pathway behind the pump house that got me a lot quicker to the parking lot. So, in the dead of night, armed with a flashlight and my little .32 Colt, I started making my way down the path. Walking along the trail, it borders the brick wall of the pump house. I notice a door I have never seen before. Massive and heavy-looking steel door. My curiosity piqued, so I decided to test the door. Sure as shit, the door moved. It swung open with a loud, groaning, scraping sound. I shine the flashlight down the hall, a set of stairs that leads down, presumably to the control room. I pulled my revolver out slowly, holding tightly onto the walnut grip as I creeped down into the bowels of the pump house. Making it down to the base of the stairwell, I noticed a few things right off the bat. Number 1, it was indeed the control room, with old, grimy, dirty panels. Number 2, the smell hit me hard. Like, sickeningly hard. It smelled of mold, mildew, and blood? Number 3, the sketchy-looking pentagram that sat in the center of the ducking room. Yeah, you heard me. A pentagram. Drawn out in chalk, with some incredibly sketchy and questionable stains on the floor. Number 4, the candles that were burning around the circle. The creep factor just ducking skyrocketed. I looked around the panel room, surveying it. My heart leapt out of my throat when I heard footsteps and talking coming down the staircase. Panicked, my eyes looked around until I found a locker that was big enough to get into. I quickly got in, very quietly shut the door to it, and stayed silent as the grave. I watched through the grates of the locker door, feeling like I was in a cheesy horror movie. 6 robed and hooded men came down into the panel room and gathered around the circle. One man carried a panting dog in his arms. The men started slowly chanting in what I can only assume was Latin, while the man who held the dog set him down, then produced a knife. I watched in pure horror as the knife was plunged into the poor dog. It whined and struggled until it died. The chanting grew louder and intensified. The room grew deathly cold, and the candles around the room went out. It was stupid ducking cold, even though it had been the dead of ducking summer. I held my breath and stayed as still as humanly possible. After, I want to say, 20 minutes or so, the men began to leave. I sighed with relief. I jumped out of my ducking skin when my flashlight banged loud and clear against the locker door. Godmother ducking, damn it. I watched in pure horror as two of the men came back down the stairs. So, you know what? Duck this shit. I kicked the door of the locker down, off its rusty hinges, revolver in hand, and using my 6'8", 320-pound body to belt out the loudest "Get the duck back, you duckers." I could. I held the revolver up, aiming at the closest man near me. I clearly towered over the two men, and I watched as the other four robed men came barreling down the stairwell. I was trembling, holding the revolver in front of the small crowd in front of me. "How long were you here?" the first man asked me. "Long enough, friend," I answered. "Fair enough. Leave. Speak to no one about this," he replied. "Deal," I said. Each one moved aside from the entrance, and I made my way up the stairs, my back facing away from them, my revolver still aimed down the stairwell, and as soon as I made it out of the door, I ran like my fat ass depended on it. I made the 20-minute hike in, like, 5 minutes. I hopped into my truck and hauled all kinds of stuff home. I went back to Bell's about a month later and was relaxing on a rock near the pump house when a young man, probably in his early 20s, sat down next to me. He lit up a fire and spoke to me. "Tell me, friend, do you believe in God?" he spoke. I took my sunglasses off and looked over to him, tapping out the ashes of my cigarette. "It all depends." My heart skipped a couple of times when I recognized the face of the young man. "Take a guess at who it was." He smiled at me. "On?" I swallowed. "Who knows?" He got up and extended his hand. "I would recommend you stay away from that house from now on." "Okay?" I shook his hand. "Sure, friend. Sure." I haven't seen the young man since, even after going back as many times as I have. Back in the 1980s, in the small town where I lived, there wasn't really a lot to do. A group of us kids kind of formed, and we would make our own adventures every weekend. I was around 15 years old at the time, and the 7 other kids I hung out with were around the same age. One weekend, we all met up at a nature trail to just walk and joke around. As we were walking along the trail, somebody mentioned that there was an abandoned honor farm not far from where we were. We all thought it was a good idea to go there and check out this scary and mysterious abandoned building. We walked for about a mile when we reached it. I remembered having a high school teacher who told us a story about a friend who had gone there. His friend was alone, and a short time after he had toured this scary old building, he walked outside only to be met by 3 Doberman pinschers. My teacher said that the dogs were snarling at his friend, and he decided that his only option was to run away as fast as he could. The dogs chased him to this fenced area, where he proceeded to climb over the fence. When he found himself safely on the other side of the fence, he heckled the dogs that had chased him. Suddenly the dogs stopped barking and growling, and they looked at the fence in a way that was methodical. They approached the fence and began literally climbing it. They used their legs as they climbed the fence in the same way a person would. His friend ran away as fast as he could, and the dogs never caught up to him. This story had left me with a real curiosity about the place, so I was excited to go. We arrived at the notorious building, and we all ran inside and split up as we explored this crazy building. Myself and my very best friend headed up a concrete stairway to the 2nd floor, where we walked in and out of the old abandoned rooms that were filled with traces of the past. There was graffiti splattered all over the walls, so we knew that many others had also been there, exploring, and damaging everything in sight. We came to this room that was completely dark, and we stood outside of the doorway, too afraid to go in. At this point, 2 guys from the group showed up, and we dared them to go in. One of the guys looked at us, rolled his eyes, and just walked into the room as he felt along the wall to guide him. He was in the room for what seemed like very long minutes. Suddenly he jumped out with a scary boo as we all jumped backwards and then laughed at what he'd done. At that moment, he looked down at his hands, and they were covered in what looked like blood. "It's probably red paint," I said as I saw the fear in his eyes. "Let's get back down to the 1st floor." All 4 of us ran down the stairs, and we met the others in a hallway right off the staircase. One of the guys in the group was a joker. We all told him about the red gunk on the guy's hands from that room on the 2nd floor, and he stared to joke about it as we all laughed at his explanations. As everyone was standing there listening to this guy joke around, I turned towards the main foyer, which was just feet away from where we were standing. As I looked, I suddenly saw a man walking through the foyer. He walked at an angle, sort of left to right, with confident strides. He was very tall, and he didn't even turn to look at us. He was wearing a long overcoat that had a hood that was pulled up over his head. He was well dressed and was wearing nice shoes. I don't know why I remember his shoes, but I took note of them. He just walked from where I could see him, and then he was out of my view. I interrupted the guy who was talking and told him what I had just seen. Everyone looked in that direction, but nobody could see the man. We all decided that we should leave and start heading back to the area where we'd all been dropped off by our parents. As we walked, we forgot all about the possible blood on the guy's hands and the man that I had seen, and we just joked around having fun as we walked. That night, I spent the night at my friend's house. They had this rabbit pen in their backyard with several adorable rabbits that my friend's mother had taken in and fed after they were abandoned as babies. The next morning, we got up and went into the kitchen, where my friend's dad told us not to go out into the backyard. We pressed him as to why we couldn't go out there, and he told us that someone had come into their yard that night and killed all the rabbits. He said that the strangest part was that there was no blood at all. Right away, I knew that someone had followed us from the Honor farm, and that same person, or whatever it was, had killed their rabbits. Something was seriously up with that place. It has since been torn down, and nothing remains of that old building. There were so many scary stories coming out about the place that the city decided to level it. There is even a movie that was made about it called The Honor Farm a few years ago. People may not think that evil is real, but I assure everyone that it is. I am a person living in Texas, and if you didn't already know, it is snowing here currently. Out of all the years I have lived here, it has only snowed on a few occasions, so it is pretty rare. Because it is snowing, me and my brother decided to go sledding down a hill in our neighborhood. Now, this hill is very small, and if I'm going to be honest, it is not really a hill. If I were to say, it is approximately only a few meters long. Like I said, we were just sledding when some white guy just straight up appeared out of nowhere from a path at the bottom of the hill we were on. I don't really remember what he looked like, but I believe that he might have been wearing sunglasses and a basic coat. My brother and I just shrugged this off, and I made a joke about how it was like he was an NPC who just spawned in. We play for about another 10 minutes, and my brother decides to go inside because his hands are starting to get cold. After he left, I sledded by myself for a few minutes, and then I just stared at the path. I then proceeded to walk up to it, and I noticed there were a whole lot of footprints going in both directions. I thought it was kind of strange because there is no reason for someone to be going down that path. All it did was just lead into the forest. I then remembered the random guy who showed up earlier. I remembered that he was walking in the opposite direction of the path. I then thought that it was a good idea to explore this strange path. As I was walking along in the direction the man came from, I heard a child yell. It wasn't exactly a scream, but it did sound kind of alarming. This sort of started to get me on edge. I continued along the path, and there were still footprints. I thought it was strange that there were footprints at the start of the path, but this was even stranger. Like I said, all this did was lead me into a forest, so why would some random person be walking here? The path was starting to get a little muddy for some reason, and I didn't want to get lost out here, so I just decided to start heading back. As I am heading back, I start to further examine the footprints. For some reason, there were animal footprints. I also saw a large footprint that was for sure an adult's. For me, this pretty much confirmed that the man was here. I continue to walk back, and, I kid you not, I hear someone yell at the top of their lungs, "Down with the N-words, white power." I froze. I live in Texas, so there are a lot of racists, but still, this scared the living hell out of me. Why was someone randomly screaming this? Better yet, why were they out in the woods screaming this? I then picked up my pace and, at last, got out of there. As I am writing this, I am contemplating whether or not I should go back out there. Part of me wants to see what it leads to, and the other part of me wants nothing to do with that path ever again. Hopefully, that white guy wasn't doing anything sketchy out there. A buddy of mine and I were exploring an old factory that was shut down for poisoning the water supply in the area 30 years ago. The area was contaminated with lead, and the factory was left pretty much unchanged aside from being partially gutted of machines. Inside the maintenance/locker room area, there was a long hallway with doors to various rooms. It was pitch black inside, even in broad daylight. We navigated the corridors with flashlights. The air smelled of mold and felt cold and damp, but the ground was dry and dusty. The lead paint was peeling off the ceiling, and the thick flakes of paint hanging from it looked like the room had been feathered. A lot of the flakes had fallen off and littered the floor. They made a satisfying crunch as we crept through. Inside one of the rooms, there was a sliver of light bleeding out of an old double door and spilling into the hallway. Naturally, this caught our attention, and we eased inside. The light turned out to be sunlight as these doors lead outside. The room was their laundry room, I assume it was for uniforms. There was a huge dryer still in there that we ventured one of us could fit in. I volunteered and climbed in. To my surprise, it still spun freely, as the bearings had remained in good health throughout the years. I braced myself and told my buddy to try spinning it. I thought I could survive a few revolutions unscathed. We spent a few minutes taking turns spinning around in this big dryer. Being teenagers, this was as much fun as we had hoped for in this creepy old factory. My turn had come around again, and just as I had begun to rock back and forth, gaining momentum, I looked to my buddy for the extra push, but he didn't help. His demeanor had instantly changed. He was pale, almost shaking, distracted, and looked like he had seen a ghost. Shh, stop, he whispered in panic. What? WTF is the matter? Listen. Do you hear that? I hurried out of the dryer before coming to complete silence and lending an ear. From the pitch-black corridor comes a familiar sound from only moments ago. Crunch, crunch, crunch. It was the paint chips on the ground getting crunched very slowly. Someone or something was creeping towards us in the pitch-black catacomb-like hallways of this decrepit factory. We had been everywhere in the factory, and not a soul or even a small animal was to be seen. The footsteps did not slow down or speed up, but they were getting louder. Crunch, crunch, we both looked at each other in disbelief and utter terror. Who could this be? What could this be? And why are they sneaking up on a cacophony of creaking dryers and laughter the pitch-black unknown? There was no time to entertain these questions. I turned to the double doors from where the sunlight was leaking and heaved myself onto them. They gave out an awful noise amidst the temporary silence and crackling of paint but didn't budge. My buddy joined in, and finally they started to give way. We resorted to kicking them for the final blow, and they burst open. I had never been so happy to see sunlight, dead grass, and rusty fences in my life. We bolted, never looking back, never going back, and never knowing what we could have encountered in that wretched, dark, and creepy corridor. This happened to us in 2010 or 2009. We had just finished upper secondary school. We made a little tradition where we went exploring this forest close to our childhood homes every time someone left town for the army, college, etc. There were rumors, and actual events, that people hung themselves in that forest, and one body was found a few years before we went there. The rumors were saying that it was a person who escaped from the mental institution that is on the other side of the forest or mountain. The mental institution was real and was known for housing violent people, and once in a while we would read news about violent stabbings and shit on the institution. In 2016, a young girl was stabbed while working by one of the people who ran away from this place. The girl was just stocking the shelves when this psychotic, unstable mental patient stabbed her ultra-violently in the chest and face until she died on the spot. Back to the story. We made a tradition where we went sleeping in this forest with a fireplace, candy, some 420 and hot dogs, steaks, and stuff, right up in the middle on top, with a stunning view of our old high school and local shops, houses we've been to, playgrounds, and football fields we used to spend our days on. We did it plenty of times and always brought flashlights and joints so we could walk in the pitch-black forest and explore to see if we could find traces of anything at all, really. We wanted to find fugitives' hideout places, people who had hung themselves, suicide notes, or anything interesting. We didn't find shit the first 2 times, but it was still thrilling and cozy and a perfect goodbye for now thing for the guys, so we kept doing it. The 3rd time we went, we walked a different route because we parked our cars at another place. We used to park at the school, but we figured we should park in a hidden place in case some janitor or neighbor sees our cars and starts making trouble. Call for towing, or write down the reg number and stuff since it was after school was closed. We just didn't want anyone to know we were there. On the way up, we see a small pit down the hill with some items laying around, and when we go closer, we see a white shirt with blood on it with the logo of the mental institution down the hill. It was like 3 to 4 kilometers away, so it wasn't exactly just down the hill. We were all scared as duck, like, holy duck, there's blood. And everyone started looking around and got nervous, and the one who touched the cloth shirt was really anxious about it. First it was like, duck, this guy probably has AIDS and shit. Then it turned into, OMFG, what if something happened to him? What if he died and I touched his blood? And we were just chuckling it off, like, don't worry, Lamau, we were all here and saw it, we will make sure you won't get arrested. We rushed back to our site, where all of our things were, we lit some joints and talked about it. We were still slightly shaking and wondered what could have happened. Did he start to bleed here or at the mental home, and why did he bleed? Probably just cut himself on some trees or fell or something. It all becomes quiet, we lay down and talk softly to each other. Suddenly, we hear our friend's deep voice say, hello? He ilu? To something behind us, we all sit up, and my eyes get ducking enormous. It was literally a human-sized humanoid there in a pit black robe, so we could only see the outline of his pale face. It felt like 30 minutes, but the whole thing ended in 5 minutes, at most. We all tried to wave and say, "Hey, who are you?" and use very vague sentences to get some response. This ducking thing just stood there like nothing, staring at us without making a sound. We tried to lob a wooden stick close to it just to get a response, and we did. The thing suddenly started shifting its shape, so we thought, but it changed its posture from standing with a bent back to squatting straight in front of us. My eyes are extremely sharp for some reason, and I focused my eyes hard to try to see the face, and I really couldn't. The area around the eye was completely dark and shadowed out. Out of nowhere, the thing turns around, lunges itself back up the hill where it came from, and disappears from our vision in 20 seconds. We were all freighted as duck, packed our shit, and moved towards the car. When we reached our cars, our jaws dropped. All of the wipers on all the cars, front and back, were pulled straight out and thrown on the ground in front of the car. Someone had walked to our cars and pulled out the wipers just to throw them in front of the car as vandalism or as a punishment for coming too close or something, in a completely remote area where there shouldn't have been anyone except normal, responsible people who walk their dogs, possibly. To this day, we are not sure what it was that came to interact with us in the forest. For all we know, it could have been a huge moose, and our minds played some tricks that made it look like a human. It was so ducking dark. But that doesn't explain the wipers on the cars, which we can't figure out any logical explanation for. One day, me and my friend wanted to go exploring the surrounding parts of my neighborhood. We lived in a suburban town in western Pennsylvania, and nothing really bad happens around here. I was about 16 at the time of this event and remember it vividly. So, on this day, we heard about an abandoned house right across the highway that has been deserted for years. Being young and adventurous at the time, my friend and I were excited to check out this place. We rode our bikes to where the house was located. The house was semi-covered by overgrown trees and vines, and the house was an eerie gray color. We parked our bikes behind the house, where the backyard was, so we wouldn't be seen by any neighbors. This house was surrounded by 4 other houses that were being lived in. The back door was already cracked open, so we didn't have to break anything open to get inside. Right as we walked through the back door, we were welcomed to the kitchen, which was destroyed by water damage and mold. Luckily, we brought masks and gloves to protect us from the smell and everything we touch in this home. Miscellaneous items were scattered everywhere across the floor and down the hall, which leads to the front door. This house is a 2-story house with an unfinished basement and looks like it was built in the mid-1900s. One thing I noticed when walking through the first floor was that lots of the furniture and decor were still present in the house, which was odd. It seems like whoever lived here has completely left everything the way it used to be, other than probably a few things, because the interior of the house was still decently bare. We found an old record player, a few old video game consoles with those massive joysticks you use, and lots of old books. These were the items we found just scattered across the first floor hallway. We haven't even gone upstairs yet. There was a narrow wood staircase that led up to the second floor. When walking up it, the silence was broken by the overwhelming sound of the creaking of the stairs. At the top, there are 2 rooms on either side of the stairs, each almost identical and symmetrical to each other. My friend and I decide to enter the left room first to see what's inside. The first thing I saw when entering was a massive gloss black piano in the middle of the floor. I was not sure why there was a piano upstairs and not on the first floor, but it was cool but ominous to see this. The thick carpet the piano sat on was a dark red color. Everything in this room was scattered across the floor as well. Most of the items were kids' toys and magazines, so I assumed that a whole family used to live here. Also, the one window that faces the backyard where we left our bikes was open when we walked in. This was odd but not surprising. The entire time here, I just had a gut feeling that we weren't alone, even though we have at least glanced into every room, and this house has been for sale since 2006, it was 2017 at the time. This is where things escalated almost immediately. My friend was searching through the bookshelves across the room while I was looking at the piano. I wanted to lighten things up since we both felt slightly uneasy being here due to the state of the house it was in, so I wanted to play a tune on the piano. I played a few notes to some random song that I don't remember, but I was interrupted by a loud crash coming from downstairs. It sounded like something from the basement, and the staircase to it was right below the staircase to the second floor, if you can picture what I mean by that. We both stood silently looking at each other in disbelief until moments later, we heard loud stomping running down the hallway on the first floor, coming towards the second floor staircase. Whatever this was, it sounded like it had big boots on, and the whole house shook after each foot smashed into the floor as it ran through the hallway. There were no voices or screaming coming from whatever this was. It was just running after us. We hear it continue to run at full speed through the house and up the creaky stairs. My friend and I were freaking out and had to make a decision fast. Whatever this thing was, it wasn't stopping at all on its way up to us. We remembered that the window next to us was open, so our only solution to getting out safely was to jump out of the window. From the moment I started playing the piano to when we jumped out the window after hearing someone chasing us, it happened within mere seconds. Luckily, our bikes were right below where we jumped out, and all I could think about was getting out and across the highway as fast as possible. I got slightly hurt after jumping out of the second-story window, but my adrenaline was through the roof, and I wasn't thinking about it in that moment. My friend was right behind me the whole time, thankfully, and we both got on our bikes and left. I was shook to tears the whole ride back home. To this day, I still have no idea what was in this house that chased us. We never heard the back or front door open, and everything in this house creaks, so we would have heard it. This was in the house the entire time we were there, and I don't know how we didn't see anything. I have a great feeling that this wasn't human, but who knows? I will never forget this day. So about 3 weeks ago, my friend, who I'll call Keith, and I were driving around town and talking about this, and that when he brought up an old juvenile facility that he and another friend Dan explored recently, and since it was only about 20 minutes from where we were asked if I wanted to check it out too, I of course said yes. We explored 3 out of the 8 buildings on the campus, the main building, one of the dorms, and the recreation center, finding all sorts of interesting things like hospital beds, pool tables, and a bunch of pianos, one of which Keith played on a bit, being a fan of piano. While hopping to see or at least get a picture of something spooky, we got no such luck but still had fun anyway. A week later, Keith gets in touch with me after work, asking if I wanted to check out another place with Dan and his girlfriend. Even though it was already close to midnight, I figured, why not? So he picked me up, met up with the others, and headed to the place, which turned out to be an old 20-story hotel that, according to what we looked up and a group of kids we met, had been abandoned for at least 15 years. Keith and I were the first to find a way in through a window that led to the main lobby area and decided to explore while we waited for Dan and the kids we met to join us. Aside from some old construction equipment laying around, the only things of note were an old bike leaning in front of the stairs and an old stack of paintings to the left of the stairway. Once the others got in, we went and explored the second floor and briefly explored the third, which was also neat, and got a few cool pics. Nothing spooky happened, and we were unable to explore the higher floors due to a gate blocking the stairway. We made our way back to the lobby, and while Keith and I tried to find a better way out, the others decided to take pictures and pose next to the stairs, the bike, the paintings, and the piano to the left. Only after Keith and I parted ways with the others and on our way home did it occur to me that I didn't remember seeing the piano when I first came in, but thought I had just missed it when Keith says, "Hey dude, you know that piano? Was it there when we got it?" I told him I was just thinking the same thing, and after looking through the first pictures I had taken, we couldn't see the piano in the spot it was in the pictures I had taken later. Thinking we were both being paranoid, I texted Dan if he had seen the piano since he came in after us. He didn't see it when he came in, either. On top of that, Keith said it seemed similar to the pianos we saw in the juvenile facility. Maybe it's just a coincidence, maybe it's nothing, but it was a bizarre experience for us. Yesterday I was exploring a section of abandoned houses in Northern Virginia with 2 friends of mine. From what we can gather, it was a developing neighborhood. The abandoned buildings consist of a gas station, a mechanic's shop, 2 houses, a garage, and several more houses stretching farther into the woods. The electronics boxes on the houses are dated around the mid-80s, and the artifacts we found inside confirm this. The closer to the road, the more graffiti and wreckage there are. As we ventured farther into the neighborhood, the signs of recent life disappeared. We make our way into the final house on the lot, hidden behind the trees. The house appears older than the rest, overgrown with vines and other plants. As we approached the door, I noticed a small black figure the size of a dog move past the doorway. I immediately dismissed it, thinking that it was simply a black cat. When we got inside, the cat was gone, and there didn't appear to be anywhere for it to go. The house is pretty worn down and torn apart, as you would expect. As we made our way through, we found a locked door to the basement. Being the strongest of the 3, I took a step back and kicked the door, sending it back with a satisfying crack. At the bottom were a series of rooms, all empty except for the final. Again, I kicked down a door to find a room untouched by time. It was a child's bedroom, from what I could tell, and it felt as if we'd stepped through time. The first thing that I noticed was the smell. Death and decay. We moved about, picking through the room and exploring. I went to open the closet. Inside the closet were piles of dead and living crows. As the light hit them, they flapped and scattered. I screamed and ran as fast as I could, with my friends in my arms. The closet was no bigger than that of a coat closest, and there is no conceivable way for them to have gotten in there. I've never heard of birds creating nests underneath the ground. I decided to drive to the largest forest in my county in hopes of getting back in touch with nature. I need to clear my head. I asked the local forestry office for the best place for a quick walk off of the main trails and was directed to this picturesque spot a little ways down the road. With the rare bit of blue sky we get in the UK, I was glad I made the spontaneous trip, and as I walked further down the path, I saw a clearing in the trees to my right. Since the plan was to get closer to nature, I ventured into the trees off the beaten path. It was great. I explored the area and listened to the birds as they swooped from branch to branch. I even got a good 5 minutes of meditation in before I heard what sounded like two animals fighting. I assumed they were just foxes and moved on. I unexpectedly reached this sand road as I emerged from the trees, but decided to walk along it for a moment as I scanned for an entry into the forest on the other side of the road. But as I looked around, I spotted a bra dangling from a bush near the road. Now, I'm aware people go to the forest for all sorts of reasons, but this did put me slightly on edge. As I turned around, I heard an electric car making its way up the road. By the time I heard it, it was less than 300 yards away. My instincts told me to hide or just avoid being seen, but there was no time, so I simply gave a polite nod as he passed and made my way in the opposite direction. He parks up behind me, just out of view. I begin to make my way off of the road, intending to go explore further, but when I saw the car, for a moment, doing a 180-degree turn then parking again, something told me to turn around and go back the way I came. As I made my way back onto the road, I spotted this man in a white shirt behind the bush the bra was hanging from. He was going in the direction I just changed course in. I crossed the road and made my way back into the forest, where I had arrived on the sand road. When I got slightly further in, I turned around to check if the man continued in the opposite direction, but he didn't. Instead, I see he has also crossed the road and is making his way into the part of the woods I entered. By this point, I knew I was being followed. There was no way he coincidentally went one way, then turned to head into this part of the forest that I entered. But I kept my pace brisk rather than running. My physical health can go south quickly, my knees are brittle and my ankles are weak. So rushing could cost me, especially since I still had to reach my car and drive away. As I traveled further, he was always following. I was cursing my luck as I made my way to the end of that section of the forest, just before the path that was after a large patch of grass and shrubbery. But as I looked back, I couldn't see him. I stopped for longer than I should have, scanning the trees and listening intently. But I hear nothing. See nothing. I make my way back onto the path with some relief and turn one last time to check the tree line. When I see that he's not there, I begin to wonder if I was overthinking the whole situation. But just as those thoughts cross my mind, I see the man emerge from the opposite side of where he was previously. At the edge of the tree line. He just stared at me. But I wasn't going to take any more chances, so I made my way down the path and back to my car. I made sure to get out of there quickly, as I knew he would have to head down the same tight country road. I reported the man to the forestry office, but there wasn't much they could do. So that was it. When I paused at the tree line, I couldn't see him. For him to have emerged from where he did when I had made it back to the path, he had to have approached from another angle. An angle that I admittedly wasn't checking. But I'm glad I never went further into the forest. I'm glad I followed my instincts. Otherwise, the only way back would have been through him. And God knows what his intentions were. Me and some friends went to an abandoned mental asylum at night, not really expecting much. We busted in one of the boarded up windows, and when we were inside, we all heard talking. We figured other people were there, so we followed the sound. We're walking down the hall and hearing what sounded like a woman whispering, "Why did you take my baby?" over and over again. At this point, I'm visibly shaking, and we all believed we had found where the sound was coming from. We go into this room, and there is a huge cage. It looked like one of those pet carriers, but human-sized. I don't know what the duck happened that night. I don't really believe dead people were talking in there, but the sheer creepiness of it all was too much. I was 16 years old, and I had just gotten my license. It was on a Friday after school, and I was hanging out with some of my friends from another school district, my girlfriend, and her best friend. We all live in small, rural towns that have absolutely nothing in a 40-mile radius except a Walmart in between and a couple Sheetz gas stations. Since there was nothing to do, we used to go ghost hunting. It pretty much meant finding abandoned buildings and checking them out. None of us ever really expected to experience anything supernatural, but it was an interesting time, and it involved doing something with friends. I had seen a house off of a highway a few times that I wanted to check out, so I told them all about it. They all agreed that it was a good idea. We all decided to stop at Walmart to grab some new flashlights of our own, and I wanted batteries for my camera. 2 of my friends and I bought a flashlight and 2 packs of batteries each, and I bought 4 packs for my camera. We have a habit of keeping the batteries that come with flashlights as emergency backups because they don't seem to last long. Armed with new flashlights, batteries, and energy drinks, we headed to the house. The house was 2 stories tall with a basement, all broken down, and was about a half-mile off the highway in the middle of a huge field. You could pretty much see it on the hill the whole hike. Just seeing it standing there with moonlight shining on it was creepy, let alone the idea of going in it. There was also a barn that had fallen down about 50 yards from the right side. The closer and closer we walked, the weirder and weirder it felt. Hair-raising is weird. The front porch steps were broken, so we had to climb up to the porch to get in. Stepping over the debris from other people busting the place up, we made our way in. On the way through the living room to the kitchen, my girlfriend claimed she felt someone pulling the hood on her sweatshirt, but I was the last person, and I was several feet behind. I figured she was either so scared she was imagining things or just saying stuff to try and freak everyone out. We made our way around the kitchen and were on our way upstairs, and she gasped and spun around, claiming she felt her hood pulled again and that I was an asshole for trying to scare her. I swore it wasn't me, and we continued taking pictures all the way. We all made it to the top of the stairs, and I saw a big hole in the attic, so I started walking toward it to take a picture. I snapped one on the way to it, and then another a little closer. The attic stairs were in a room to the left, and there was a hallway with rooms off it to the right. We all went to the attic first to check it out, and all that was up there was an old wooden ladder and a broken crate. We walked back down to the second floor, all disappointed. At that point, I was the only one with a flashlight out, so everyone followed me through the hallway to a room on the end at the left. It seemed really breezy in the room compared to the rest of the house, even though there were broken, open windows all through it. After the last person was about 3 steps in, my flashlight went out. It was still turned on, but it seemed like it went dead. The first thing I thought was, there's no way these brand new batteries went dead in 20 minutes in an LED flashlight. Almost instantly after, I heard, "My phone's dead and yeah, mine too," from my girlfriend and her best friend. One by one, my other friends pulled out their flashlights, flicked them on and off, and nothing happened. I pulled my camera out of my pocket to take a picture with the hope of maybe catching something weird, but the screen was black with a flashing red dead battery symbol. At that point, we were all weirded out and practically fighting each other to get out of the room. Once we made it to the stairs, the flashlights worked again, my camera had about 3/4 THs of a battery bar, and the cell phones were able to be turned back on. I got goosebumps and tensed up, and we hastened our pace down the stairs and figured the easiest way out would be through the basement door we saw under the porch on the way in since the porch stairs were broken. Sadly, it wasn't the least creepy way. We made our way down through the basement, which turned out to be a basic maze and looked like it could have been in the Blair Witch Project. We fought our way through the vines that had grown over the door to the outside and made our way away from the house. About 200 yards from the house, we heard what sounded like a tin food can being spiked on the ground and then rolling down the basement steps. I don't even remember seeing a tin can anywhere in the house. We all started running as fast as we could while being careful not to trip over something in the high weeds. Once we got back to the car and tried to theorize what the hell just happened, I started looking through all the pictures. They all just looked like dust particle-ridden pictures of an old house, except for one. When I snapped the 2 pictures of the attic, the first was just like all the others, but the second had a thick, white, smoky mist over the whole. It wasn't cold, just a cool night, so there couldn't have been breath mist, and no one smoked. To this day, I get goosebumps and glassy eyes every time I look through these pictures. This happened a couple years ago. In WA, there is an old military outpost with under or above ground bunkers that are super spooky. There are tons of them, and they sprawl out pretty far. My girlfriend and I decided to explore, which I've done numerous times, but went to a spot I hadn't been before. The doors on the bunkers are heavy steel, with some of them having huge crank locks. The passageways are extremely narrow and pitch black. I honestly hate them but love exploring them. We went into one passageway that had 2 entrances, each with a heavy locking door. As we were going further in, we heard a huge slam behind us. We keep going to the end, but the door is locked. No problem, we go back the way we came, and that door is locked too. I was ducking spooked, but after a little exploring, we found a tiny crawl space through another tunnel that led outside. It was littered with glass, and you had to crawl one at a time. I came out so pissed and hunted around, yelling if anyone was there to come fight me since we could have been stuck in there if there hadn't been a crawl space. I'm still not sure if it was a person who trapped us or a ghost. The place always spooks me, though. I'm a person who doesn't hang around groups of friends, so that means I am usually around a single friend at any given time. My name is not relevant, but I will say that I am 16 and this happened to me a few years ago. My then best friend and I would go off and do whatever dumb or adventurous thing we could think of at the time. Being teenage guys, neither of us wanted to show any fear. We lived near a small bayou, and sometimes we would ride our bikes alongside it or explore some drainage areas. Of the two of us, I was the more sensible one, meaning I knew better than to go certain places or hang around the kinds of people he eventually got involved with, the reason we are no longer friends. One day we were bored and thought about the skate park that was being demolished so a new neighborhood could be constructed. He told me about a factory, I'm not sure what it was, but it looked like a boat repair place, that had been closed because of a fire and was less than a 1/4 mile away from us. This is getting long already, so I'm just going to cut to the chase as best I can. We ended up going around the side of the compound that borders a bayou and through the back wall of the compound. The outside was kind of in a dilapidated state, but it looked relatively clean. In the courtyard, there was a front fence and gate made of sheet metal, so no one could see us. To our right, there was a building that was low to the ground. It looked like a barn for horses, but it was made out of sheet metal and housed boats with a roof that looked like a bomb fell through it. There was also a main building that was 1 story but looked like a giant hangar. It was 30+ feet tall and had most of the rusty, scorched, sheet metal walls blown or stripped off of the frame. Inside, there was a large open floor space that opened to the center of the compound. There was also an office area with a single hallway, a door that led out of the hangar, and another door that went out front on the opposite end. This second door was locked. We tried to open it and even kicked it, but it was solidly shut. We goofed around in the large open area for a bit, then decided to go into the office area. Here's where it gets scary. In the office area, there is a single straight hallway with a bathroom on the opposite side of the hallway, across from the entrance door to the large space. There were 3 other rooms, with 2 on the bathroom side and a single larger one on the side with the hangar door, which was near the front exit that was on the opposite end of the hall. We go from room to room, looking around, and even spend at least a good 10 minutes looking through the larger room. After having our fill of exploration, we decided to head back to the hangar entrance door and stop by the bathroom to crack some toilet jokes. As I'm standing in the doorway of the bathroom, I get a slow burning feeling in the pit of my stomach, and then suddenly I hear heavy footsteps to my left, almost stomping. I turn to look down the hall, only to hear a sharp crack and see the locked door halfway through closing on the opposite end of the hall. I thought that I saw a glimpse of something slipping through that door and moving away. I told my friend, and we swiftly started towards that end of the hall. We looked in the large room that was right next to the door that just opened. As we looked around, we started to smell something pungent and burning. We also felt a gentle heat, but it was dark, and we saw no embers or flames. When we checked the room earlier, we saw signs of people, but nobody was actually there, and there was no active fire. We were pretty spooked and quickly exited through the door that the thing had just gone through. We were now on the street and didn't see anybody around but the few cars that were driving past on the road. The wind and silent rumble of the road make us realize that any calls for help would have been in vain. The time between me hearing or seeing the thing and us leaving was no more than a minute. We went home and haven't been in that area since. What makes it scary in my mind is the fact that a fire happened some time before, yet we still smelled burning. Also, that door was locked. We even tried opening it once we got inside. On top of all that, the fact that whoever or whatever it was could have hurt us or worse freaks me out, because nobody would have a clue as to what happened to us. I went exploring in an abandoned house with a couple of friends one night. The top floor was being renovated, prior to being abandoned, but the rest of the house was pretty well kept. The first bedroom was empty except for a few saws hanging up in the closet and papers strewn on the floor. The saws were weird, but we figured other kids might have been there previously and put them there to up the creepy factor. The second bedroom had a bed with, I shit you not, shackles attached to the posts and a steak knife on the bedside table. On a desk in the second bedroom was a map of the tri-state area with a lot of bizarre marks on it. This all seemed creepy to us, but not creepy enough to make us leave, so we kept going. In the kitchen, we found a notebook with most of the papers ripped out and a couple entries that seemed to have been written by a hospice. They read along the lines of, I came back to find she had put all the forks and knives in her bedroom drawers again. Ants everywhere, but no food. To the end entries, which were more like she will no longer cooperate. I cannot do this anymore. I cannot. Some of the pages had gotten wet over the years, so we couldn't get full sentences, but some of the pages were just names and weird phrases repeated over and over. I cannot remember any of the phrases, unfortunately. Headed down to the basement and was hit with the most foul smell we could ever imagine. It seemed to come from the 5/6 metal drums, all clustered in the center or back of the room. They were all leaking, so we didn't get very close to them, but even after staying a good distance away, our eyes still burned from the smell. Next thing we know, it sounds like someone huge is running from the far end of the house to where the top of the stairs for the basement were. We all start screaming and get out as fast as we can, only to end up standing with everyone in the overgrown yard about 30 feet from the house and listening to the entire place come to life with loud bangs, doors slamming, and what sounded like shattering glass. We went back another time in the daylight, and nothing happened, but we stayed far away from the basement. I still wonder what the hell was kept in those metal drums. I was in an abandoned mental hospital with my friend. We had been there before, and this was the second, and last, time we went. So we entered through the basement because the door was conveniently open, and then made our way upstairs. It's a 4-story building, and when we turned the corner to go up to the 3rd floor, there was a dead baby kitten laying there. So that's what got me unsettled in the first place. We stepped around it and continued ducking around in the building. We were having a great time until we heard a loud banging sound, like a door slamming. We couldn't tell if it was above or below us, but we knew the only way out was through the basement, so we grabbed whatever heavy debris we could find and made our way down, acting like we were ready to duck shit up if something popped around the corner, but really we were both shaking in our boots. We got out perfectly safe, but it was terrifying to think that someone, or something, was in there with us the entire time. The weirdest thing was that we'd already explored the entire building before we heard the bang. So if it were another person, they would have had to avoid us on purpose so we wouldn't see them. It gives me the ducking creeps to imagine someone watching us from the darkness. My group of friends growing up was hugely into paranormal stuff. Living in Connecticut, there are many haunted or cursed spots where nasty things went down. It's New England after all. Connecticut is home to some of the most haunted places in the country, and I believe it has the largest collection of haunted places in the country. One pilgrimage here for the ghostly or thrill-seeking youth is a place called Dudleytown. Long story short, the local legend is that some real demonic, murderous, suicidal stuff happened here in these creepy woods out in the middle of nowhere. What remains today is just some small rock wall structures falling apart in the middle of the woods. It was never a town, they claim, but there were certainly people living here. So one October, about 20 years ago, when I was 15, we loaded up a few cars with all the boys and some cute, mostly, girlfriends of ours and made the hour-long trip. I always prided myself on fearing nothing, at least not the supernatural. I enjoyed watching most of my friends be terrified of things I knew weren't real. I would happily charge into a haunted house and pretend to face duck a haunted doll. I never believed any of it and still don't, for the most part. Living here, I've been in many different woods hundreds of times, alone, at night, overnight, etc. It has never bothered me at all. There are no real predators here to worry about, either. Arriving in these particular woods was different. I actually felt off. We all did, and most people do, but that is because most people that come here believe it is haunted by some very nasty evil and get spooked. I, however, did not believe that one bit, but this feeling of dread just came over me as we arrived. I chalked it up to adrenaline. It's always exciting when a group is about to do something spooky fun together, but this feeling was strange. I spent most of the night playing fearless hero to one girl in particular, holding her hand as we all walked through the woods exploring, trying to stay on the paths. You can get lost for miles in these woods easily. I remember talking to myself, psyching myself up, saying, "Duck you to ghosts, and this is all bullshit," wondering why I couldn't shake this uneasy feeling. I couldn't enjoy holding this cute girl's hand. I put on a good show, made jokes, and smiled, but the whole time I just felt so off. We left the woods a couple hours later, without incident. Your typical spooky sounds happened. It's the woods, branches are always falling in the distance, making an echoing crackle that freaks everyone out, but that was all. On the drive home, I still could not shake the uneasy feeling. Everything seemed off, not real. I get dropped off at my house, it's almost 4 a.m., and I now have to walk about 2 miles to work for 430 at a deli, preparing the food for the day. I only agreed to take it a couple of times because I would be home by noon to enjoy the rest of my Saturday. As I walk, the feeling is still there, and it's growing. It's dark, but there are street lights, every house is dark, there are no cars, there is no sound, and the street, which is a fairly main road, is empty. This is not unusual for this hour. I've made the walk before at this time, but usually there is at least some minor activity, a newspaper truck, a few people who work early driving around, or just lights or televisions on in a couple houses, at least for the night owls or early risers. I notice myself noticing how off it all seems. At that moment, I laugh to myself and tell myself, this is stupid as duck, you are being a pussycat, there are no demons, no ghosts, duck ghosts, you can suck my duck. At that exact moment, I finish the little pep talk with myself, a sound I had never heard before, or again, so loud that I thought my eardrums were going off. It's like the screeching of a train going 100 miles per hour just slammed on the emergency brake is the only thing close I can compare to, and the street light right above my head goes out the second, the 5 seconds, or so insane screeching stops. I fall to the ground in a crouching position, almost shitting myself. I sit there in the dark, all the other street lights working perfectly, looking around at all the dozens of houses lining the street, waiting for everyone to jump out of bed, thinking a 747 just crashed into their lawn. This noise was so loud, people the next town over could have heard it and nothing. No one wakes up, no lights go on. I am sitting there, my heart beating a mile a minute, under the one street light that is out. I stand up, compose myself, and begin to walk slowly, wondering if I should run home and hide under the covers but instead continue on to work. I turn around about 30 steps later, freaked out, feeling like something is following me but more likely just scared SH-less, and as I turn, the street light goes back on the second my eyes meet it. At that moment, even in the shock of seeing that and what had just happened, a calm came over me. It was as if whatever evil feeling or terror had been riding on my chest like a bag of rocks all night just vanished in an instant. To this day, I wonder how possible it could be that the street light malfunctioned the exact second I walked under it and resumed working the moment I looked back at it. It's certainly possible, though the one thing I know for sure is that the grating screeching was loud enough to wake the dead. And what are the odds that in all the dozen houses right around that spot, not one person was woken up? Why did I feel such dread all night, then have something insane happen, and then feel immediately calm and relaxed seconds later? I chalk a lot of things up to coincidence, where others reach for crazy answers, but I've heard or read recounts of many people who claimed evil spirits latched onto them or messed with them, and their sensations were similar to mine. According to a paranormal addict friend of mine who didn't bat an eye when I told this story, basically I got what I should have expected. I had in fact said things in my head like, if you're real, come show me, come prove it, which, I'm ready, and in his words, I challenged the spirit world and it accepted. What is also disturbing to me is that multiple times over the last 20 years I have walked under a light and it has gone out, in my own house, in other people's houses, and yes, a couple of street lights. It's been maybe a half dozen times, but it's like it is reminding me, hey, remember us? Just know we are always here. I tell myself it's just a silly coincidence, but I'll never go near those woods again, so I guess I don't believe it is. I have explored abandoned buildings many times. But during one late-night exploration about 18 months ago, my friend and I had a crazy encounter inside a mansion-type office building inside an abandoned steel factory. It was around 1 a.m., and we were on the first floor, looking around and taking pictures, when I heard movement upstairs and quickly whispered, "We have to go," while pointing up. When my friend asked, "What?" we heard boom, boom, loud banging up there, and we took off running. By the time we passed the stairs, whoever it was there, and we hauled ass out the door outside. And that's when my friend froze in his tracks, staring frozen into the doorway. I was blasting off my stun gun and yelling at my friend, "Come on." He suddenly snapped out of it and ran, yelling, "They have no eyes. They have no eyes. It's a white mask with no eyes and no mouth." After that, we've seen a lot of graffiti throughout that sprawling complex, depicting a faceless being with the words "I don't need eyes to see" or "who?" next to the portrait. We don't go into that building at night anymore, though I'd like to, but really, it's unnerving at times, even during the day. Sometimes I feel like I'm being watched in there. This may be the strangest and most terrifying thing I have experienced while doing urban exploration. There were two of us, were in the abandoned metropolis of Rochester, New York, filming a documentary on it. At one point, we heard a voice echoing through the concrete corridor. At first, it sounded like a woman calling for a friend, but what she was saying was unintelligible. We assumed she was calling out for a friend, so we kept walking. I heard nothing for a few seconds, but then it started up again. This time, it sounded closer and stranger. Still nonsense, but no longer like she was calling for a friend, more like she was yelling at someone. Us, maybe. Then a light appeared from one of the pillars. As soon as we turned off ours, the light was gone. There was no voice after that, and no light or sound at all. There was no sound of someone running, walking away, or anything. We didn't think much of it at the time, but things got stranger while I was editing the video. So the light appeared relatively close to us, maybe 100 or 150 meters away. This was close to an open manhole cover that led into an old brick sewer that we found. It looked like it was recently open, and although we didn't entertain the notion at the time, this woman may have gone down there after we spooked her. It is also possible that she hid and waited for us to leave or was following us. I had a feeling we were being watched, and she kept checking behind me the whole time we were down there. That doesn't prove that she was following us, but it is certainly odd. I have been to abandoned hospitals and high schools, and rarely have I had this feeling. After the documentary was uploaded, a few people I know tried to decipher what she was saying, but it sounded like nonsense. I don't think this was anything paranormal, but the whole thing was just weird. If it were just a squatter or homeless person, we would know. We would have heard them running or hiding, or they would have tried to scare us away or something. It was a very odd experience. Does anyone have any idea what this could have been? I have really been into urban exploration, urbex for short, for a couple of years now, and living in Europe, specifically Germany, there are always reasonably nearby sites to visit. I started by venturing into well-researched urbex areas with my friends. At the time, I was a teen girl who was afraid to explore alone, afraid of getting assaulted, kidnapped, mugged, or murdered. Eventually, though, after about a year of urbexing with friends, I decided that I was finally competent enough to explore alone. I had become knowledgeable of what safety measures to take. For instance, equipment pieces like masks are necessary when entering old buildings due to the likeliness of asbestos particles being present, and one should always wear thick clothes and sturdy shoes to ensure you do not step on or bump into anything sharp and harmful. I always scope the buildings and pre-plan entry and exit plans. Additionally, my location was shared with one of my closest friends every time I went on an adventure. I had successfully urbexed several times alone and covered many abandoned places across East Germany. In July of 2018, however, things went very wrong. It was the peak of summer, and because I had explored almost all of the places near me, I had to dedicate time to more tedious methods of finding spots. I began to research bunkers that were used in prevalent wars in Germany, especially in World War II. I came across one in the depths of a forest, about a 3-hour drive from my city. I was very certain it would be there, and when I arrived, it sure was. I was over the moon. I felt like a real explorer, uncovering ancient artifacts. It was all concrete on the outside and had no sign of vandalism, so I assumed no one else had ever found it. It took me almost an hour to find a way in. I fiddled with the door, banged rocks up against it, and prayed until it finally cracked open. It was almost too easy. I turned my headlamp on and was wearing a mask and gloves for extra protection. Even through the mask, the smell was foul, as if something had died in there. The interior was surprisingly large, and the floor was laden with papers and trash. What began to freak me out was that in one of the sleeping quarters I found a pillow that was slightly ripped open, and when I picked it up, I realized it was hair, human hair, I think. This filled me with dread, as I immediately assumed that it was the hair of Jewish prisoners of the Holocaust. I began to think of the horrors they experienced. I suddenly wanted to leave, but I forced myself to stay, as I did not want to drive for 3 hours for nothing. When I pulled my eyes away from the pillow and scanned the room, I recoiled and noticed something strange, out of place, even. It was a can of beans with a plastic spoon in it. The paper can wrap was still vibrant. I picked it up carefully to examine it, and I read the expiration date of July 11, 2018. I was a bit freaked out, but I just chalked it up to someone else exploring this place before me. However, as I kept exploring, I started to see signs of modern life, more food packaging, decent clothes, air freshener cans. The rotten smell became more pungent as I walked around. As soon as I entered the next room, I physically folded at the putrid smell that instantly made me feel sick. As I recovered from the smell, I began to look around the room and almost jumped when I saw 3 bodies. The first thought that rushed to my head was that this place was occupied by squatters, but I think that was just the shock, as clearly they were dead. It was a heavy-set old man, a woman of similar age, and, very distressingly, a small boy, maybe 9 years old. Their bodies were swollen, and their skin was purple and waxy. They didn't look like humans. I began to cry. I could not breathe. Thousands of thoughts consumed my mind. What if the person who did this is close? What if they find me? I would end up dead, just like that poor family. I went to call the emergency service number for my country, but there was no service. In my shocked and terrified state, I decided to take photos of the scene before exiting the bunker as fast as I could. I did not even bother shutting the door, I just ran. Much to my horror, I froze on the spot when I heard footsteps that were not mine. I crouched behind a fallen tree, though I could still see the bunker entrance if I jutted my head out, though I didn't dare to. I heard a male voice seethe and then yell I was not expecting visitors in German before staunching into the bunker. I felt the biggest relief that he decided to forego scooping the area out first, and when I thought he was deep enough in the bunker to not hear me, I ran as fast as my body could possibly allow. I remembered that the road was about a 30-minute walk from the bunker, and I ran for what felt like ages. As I saw the road, I heard a vicious scream running behind me. I freaked out and could hear the crazy murderer chasing after me. I put in every ounce of survival I had in me and ran for a couple minutes more before finally crawling up to the road and to my car, which was about 200 meters from where I emerged. My keys were in my backpack, and my shaky hands weren't helping me open the zip. However, when I got them, I looked over and saw his figure climbing to the road from the forest. He seemed about 60 and was quite tall, maybe 180 centimeters, and very bulky as well. In his hand was a large knife, which looked well used. I was able to get into my car and lock the doors just as he slammed into my window, banging on the glass and cursing at me, his crazy blue eyes wide and bloodshot. I started the ignition and drove over 140 kilometers an hour, which was well over the speed limit, though I didn't care. Looking back, I am so grateful that he didn't think to slash my tires and instead was too focused on screaming at me. I stopped at the nearest petrol station, called my father, and told him everything. I arrived home, and he met me at my place. I had only recently moved out, being only 20 years old. We immediately went to the police, showed them the photos I took, described the man, and gave them the coordinates for the place. They said that they would check the bunker out, however, they never got back to me. Since then, I have never done urbex, and for a long time, I could not go out alone. I even got therapy to deal with the trauma. To this day, over 5 years later, the images of those victims and their abusers' evil eyes and the sound of his rough and sinister voice still haunt my dreams. I used to do a lot of photography in abandoned buildings, and there was an old textile factory from the 1950s I used to love to explore. I always liked to take someone with me when I went, as setting up a shot with a tripod leaves me pretty vulnerable. One time I went by myself, I discovered a den on one of the floors I had never seen before. In the open cavern of this floor of the factory, someone had taken plywood and constructed a shack. Inside was a musty mattress, a desk, a chair, and quite a lot of wax wrappers. A versed acquaintance later told me they were likely from heroin. I didn't stay on that floor for very long as I heard a banging from 2 floors up. I snuck my way up there and saw a man with a rusty iron pipe bashing random concrete surfaces. I got out of there pretty quick. Second scariest, I suppose I stumbled upon a small commune. I took a photo of a rundown boat behind a building and didn't take notice of the people behind the building. When I noticed them, I got on my bicycle and started to ride away. A man ran me down and grabbed hold of my backpack, essentially pulling me off my bike. People came out of the woods and surrounded me. They didn't speak English very well, but they got the point across that they wanted my memory card. I gave it to them, and they let me go. I have had many such experiences and never really ran into much trouble. It was definitely risky, especially being a skinny white kid in a city known for murder and in a district of that city specifically known for murder. A few years ago, maybe in 2013, I was out visiting my uncle's house in a pretty low population area of northern Colorado that was founded in the early 1800s. There's a lot of dirt roads and a super old cemetery with graves from that century as well. We would go out there with the intention of ghost hunting in the cemetery and also finding new spots to explore, including a house where we'd encountered a spirit telling us audibly to get out right before we saw red eyes appear about 6 feet high in the doorway. Not being scared off, we continued to explore different spots, going up there almost every weekend for a few months. There were several strange events that we experienced, but definitely the strangest by far occurred one night while out driving around with my uncle and 3 of my cousins. The first part of this story happened about 2 a.m. on a dirt road about a 15-minute drive from any form of civilization. So we're driving down the road and come to a bridge where there's a pretty fast-flowing river going underneath, so we decide it's a good spot to stop and check it out. Next to the bridge and river, there's a large grain field stretching way out to a small forest, maybe a half-mile away in the distance. You are able to walk into the field by way of a dirt path heading towards the forest. After walking around for a few minutes watching the water and not really having anything happen, we're getting ready to go, and we see a small orange light appear in the middle of the grain, starting to slowly bob up and down and slowly coming towards us. Keep in mind that we're out in the middle of nowhere, and there's no homes or any forms of civilization nearby for a few miles. So we see this light and get a little nervous, thinking maybe it is like a person out there who own the land somehow and were coming to tell us to leave, so we get back in the car and start to slowly drive away while watching the light. The strange thing about the light is that it was square and almost looked like a lantern, and it seemed to come out of nowhere. So as we're slowly rolling away, the light starts to pick up speed toward us. I'm talking about at least 10 miles an hour, just moving through the grain field. So we're officially spooked at this point, and we start to drive faster away. About a quarter of the way down the road, my uncle's van just dies, all the electronics go out, and the engine shuts off. We're just rolling slowly, surrounded by silence, still able to see the light in the field not slowing down. So my uncle luckily gets the van started back up, and we fly out of there. So fast forward to a week later, and we all go back up there to the exact spot to kind of check it out during the day, and we get to the bridge and all get out and make a startling discovery. Under the bridge, where only a week ago there was a fast-flowing river, it's just a dried-up, narrow pathway where you could tell a river once was. It looked like it had been dried up for years. After being confused for a minute, we decided that there was something strange about this area and that we should come back later at night to see what happened. So we go about our day and wait for it to get dark. At around 1 a.m., we headed back over to the spot, and the whole vibe everywhere was just super weird. So we pull up and shut off the van, and we all take a second to muster up the strength and get out of the car. One of my cousins and I decided to start walking up the dirt path that leads alongside the grain field towards the forest, pretty close to where we saw the light floating the week before. So we're just walking along, kind of bullshitting, trying to talk to each other to distract ourselves and not be nervous. We're just walking along, and it's pretty quiet, there's nothing happening, so as I'm starting to pull my phone out to have it ready to record in case anything happens, we hear my uncle start yelling for us to hurry and come back in a super concerned voice. So we turn around and we're maybe a little over a quarter mile away from the car, and we start back, not in a hurry or anything, and maybe 5 seconds go by and there's a loud sound that goes off out towards the forest. I always have trouble explaining exactly how it sounded, but it was just this deep roaring sound, almost exactly like the one you hear in Cobra Black Ops Zombies when you turn on the power in the theater, just like no animal or human sound I've never heard before. Anyway, we hear that and just take off, running full speed back towards the car. I covered that distance in less than 30 seconds and was back in the car with the door locked faster than I ever thought possible. After my cousin and I calmed down for a few minutes, we all get out of the car and tell my uncle and other cousin what we heard. He then told us the reason he called us to come back to the car in the first place was because he saw 3 lights shoot up in the sky right above our heads, and it freaked him out. After being all shaken up, we decide to leave. As we're driving back home, we were all just talking about how weird the vibe was all night, and just as my uncle was saying something, we started to pass by something on the side of the road, and we're all like, what the hell was that? So we turned around, pulled up to it, and got out. There's just a car on the side of the dirt road, just flipped on its back, windows shattered, just a fresh sign of an accident. So we were checking to see if anyone was hurt, but no one was around. Again, we were miles out in the middle of nowhere, with nowhere for anyone to go. Whoever crashed also left their purse behind, which we thought was strange. We checked the surrounding areas, no one was anywhere to be found, so we called the cops, let them know about the accident, and headed home. Some weird stuff happened while I was trying to sleep throughout the night, like through the window I could see the lights outside kept turning on and off as I was laying in the dark by myself in the living room. So needless to say, I didn't get any sleep until the sun came up. After doing some reflection, I wasn't sure what to make of the whole situation, and I just figured it could be anything from a spirit to a skinwalker to a Bigfoot or something, and maybe it was just a coincidence with the car accident, but I wasn't sure. Now I've kind of pieced together that it may have been something like an alien encounter, like the lights in the sky that my uncle saw, the weird inhuman scream, and the car, which could have been like an abduction site, where they'd bring the person back after some time and make them wake up thinking they were just in an accident, only because it was just sketchy how the car was perfectly intact other than the windows being shattered and obviously the fact that it was completely flipped over. There was no second car or dented parts like if a second car had hit it and flipped it, and it was all flat land, so it just didn't make sense that the car would just flip over once and not be all destroyed, scratched up, or dented all the way around. It literally looked like someone picked it up, set it perfectly on its roof, and just smashed out all the windows. But that's my weird story, and I feel strongly that it had to be some sort of extraterrestrial encounter. When I was 13 years old, I had a friend who loved to explore with me. We would wander all around town on our bikes and have fun. One Thursday evening at the beginning of the school year, we decided to check out the house next to us. We were neighbors. It had been vacant for almost a year, and no one was interested in buying it, so we thought no harm could be done if we just looked around the backyard. We opened the mossy, grown-over gate into a yard filled with overgrown plants and grass. To the left of the gate was a cement platform that had a door leading to the garage. We tried to open it, but it was locked. We joked about how cool it would be if we could get in and make it our own clubhouse. I tried pushing against the door, and surprisingly, it gave way and opened into a huge garage with shelves filled with objects and tools. We looked at each other in shock, a little scared that we had actually gotten in. We walked in and started looking at the shelves. They were piled high with typical garden supplies and old tools. We even found some paint. We looked up and said goodbye to the attic. I didn't want to see what was up there, but my friend did. She pulled the string, and the stairs slowly came down. We were greeted with a huge gust of hot air. She slowly climbed up the ladder with her phone flashlight and started looking around. I never went up there, but she told me it was really creepy. There was an old, beat-up mattress, a couch, and a chair in the center of the attic. She didn't stay up there long, but while she was in there, I heard noises inside the house. I was creeped out and told her to hurry up because I wanted to go. We decided to keep this a secret. We left the door open and made sure it closed all the way. The next day, we looked around the garage more and found the door leading inside the house. We tried it, but it was locked. Our hope of getting in was ruined. Again, while we were in there, we heard noises but ran out of fear before we looked around. That night, since it was Friday, we stayed out late with our other neighborhood friends, telling stories and talking. When we finally decided to tell them about the house, it was getting dark, and I noticed something weird about one of the windows on the second floor. The blinds were up and the lights were on. I nudged my friend, and she saw it too. A few days later, after thinking it might have been some technical issue, we wanted to return to the garage to make a fort. We went in and noticed the door to the house was slightly cracked open. Being dumb, we opened the door and looked in. The floor was covered in dust, but there were a big pair of boot footprints on the floor. A dark feeling washed over me and told me to get out fast. We never went back. So I'll start the story by telling you a little about myself. I was raised in a wealthy suburb about 30 minutes from Washington, D.C. My father is a semi-famous photographer and adventurer, so I suppose it's in my blood. I went to college for about a year but dropped out due to bad grades and partying too much. When I returned to my hometown, the realization hit me that all my friends were off at college. I had one friend that I had strayed away from in high school, probably trying to climb the social ladder. He shared my passion for adventure, the unknown, and, of course, the outdoors. It all kind of started because we were always looking for a place to do illegal activities. You know, the things typical parents say aren't allowed under their roof yet, 20 miles away in DC, are legal. So we started hanging out in this abandoned house we had found in the forest, and I think that's where my obsession started. We raided the house and found tons of vintage clothing, sunglasses, weird hunting equipment, maps, the list goes on. It was a rush, like solving a mystery. Where did these people go? Why did they leave all this stuff? From there, I spent literally too much time trying to find other abandoned properties to explore, figuring out where there was one and where there were multiples. And boy, was I right. Google Maps satellite view proved to be a very helpful tool for finding these ghost houses. You're probably asking yourself why I'm writing this. It's not scary, but hold on, the best is for last. The point of all this is that breaking into abandoned or unoccupied houses was a normal occurrence for me. It didn't frighten me but gave me a rush, so when this next part happened, you must understand that this was not my head playing tricks. So it was a typical day for me, searching Google Maps looking for my next adventure. I came across a farm-type property that was not far from a road but had no visible driveway, dead giveaway, it was abandoned. I cased it out from the street during the day solo and decided to call my partner in crime up and see if he wanted to go check it out that night since we only explored under the cover of darkness. He was no stranger to this type of thing either. He agreed, and we set up a time to meet so we could take just my truck there. But as we pulled up to the property, I pulled out my phone to orientate the map to our location so we understood possible escape routes back to the truck should anything happen, police or worse. That was when I noticed I had completely missed the third building, which was way far from the rest of the buildings on the property. We agreed that we should check that one out first since it seemed more mysterious. It was a good 200 yards back in the woods and involved cutting through 2 razor wire fences. We finally arrived at this little white wooden house. It had a small shed that we decided to check out first. This 20x20 shed contained everything from garden tools to garbage bags of cans to children's toys. We couldn't see the floor. Uninterested in a shed full of garbage, we made our way for the decrepit 2-story house. We got to the porch and found a table with a solar panel light on it, which I now realize means someone was there when it had no power and after the invention of the solar panel because this house looked to have been built in the 20s, maybe. The basement was a classic-looking door on the outside of the ground with a staircase. We went down and just found boxes of VHS tapes marked with weird names like It's Going to Be Alright and Sometimes You Never Know. Others just had dates on them or days of the week. There were boxes of Polaroid pictures, but we couldn't make any sense of them. None seemed to be of the same people except for one guy who was in multiple pictures. The basement was not connected to the upper floor, and all the doors and windows were boarded up, so we looked for the best one to break off and continued in. The room whose window we entered had more pictures in it, but they were on the floor, like they had been thrown at the wall. As I entered the hallway, I got my first hint that something weird had happened here. Staring me right in the face was a fuzzy teddy bear wearing a woman's bra. I believe me and my friend both looked at each other with a WTF kind of look. We kept going and found a room with bunk beds in it and, to our dismay, more stuffed animals wearing bras. Perhaps the most chilling thing was finding children's coloring books, vocabulary, and spelling books that were of a very elementary level, which seemed to indicate that kids had lived here. The kitchen was pretty much the last place we went before deciding it was time to leave. I first noticed the mirror next to the sink had the words "You were beautiful" written on it in lipstick. In there, we found many liquor bottles, tubes of lipstick, and in the sink, a red woman's wig. The place just felt like something dark and sinister had occurred in it. The first thing I typically do when I find a new abandoned house is try to estimate the last time it was inhabited. Before we headed out of there, I ran my flashlight by the floor and found a bag with some Gatorade bottles in it. They didn't look old, and I was right, the production date was only 1 year from the date we were there. Meaning someone had been there with them in the last year or couple months. Upon informing my friend about this, we got creeped out that someone might be watching us or whatever and decided to leave. As we calmly walked away from the house, we both began to hear singing like a child humming a nursery rhyme or something, but we both agreed it was the wind. Now, 100 yards away from the house, we hear an unmistakable child laugh. Neither of us said anything but simultaneously felt the need to start running. We didn't stop until we got back to the truck. We drank pretty heavily that night, joking about stuffed animals wearing bras. And while we still joke about it from time to time, that was the last time we ever went into another abandoned house.